Greetings, this is Anonymous. Our activists continue to investigate and expose the United Kingdom's vision implant experiment, Project Omega. Our activists have received the first vision nightshade implant victim's story statement for you the people. This statement is fundamental to the bringing down the UK establishment and government, as well as waking up the whole world to how vulnerable the lone activist or the implanted actually are. Therefore, Anonymous have let it be known that we are on the side of all activists and implanted victims, as well as all whistleblowers. Spread the word of this video and wake the world up to what we must truly resist: the Western government's vision implant. Enjoy the video and spread the word. We are Anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
The Statement by John Duffy. My codes. 1. No. 2. Yes. 3. Trust. 4. Nation. 5. Money or hospital. 6. City. 7. John Duffy. 8. Hate or great. 9. Police or when in abroad security. 10. Assassinate. 11. John Duffy. 12. Whistleblow. 14. Cover up or set up. 15. MI5 security. 16. MI6 security. 19. Foreign security. 20. Government. 21. GCHQ NSA. 33. Quick escape. 41. Cover up. Between January and March of 2006, I was on a computer course run by Learning IT Limited based in Stirling. It was on this course that a security background check was done on me, as there are military personnel being trained by the same company. It was this background check that the government found out that I lived on my own and that my parents were dead. It was because of those facts that the government considered me to be expendable. The Prime Minister Tony Blair and the Home Secretary Charles Clarke then ordered the security services to use me in a human experiment in violation of Article 20 of the Helsinki Declaration, which states that all human experiments must be conducted on a volunteer. I was not a volunteer. The government put an implant into the back of my brain. I was drugged while I was sleeping and taken out to a mobile field theatre outside of my home where I had the operation in February of 2006. The purpose of the experiment was to test the prototype implant in a field environment. The implant was put into the occipital lobe of the brain where there is a known communication processing area, and I have an unexplained 3-inch scar that coincides with that location on the back of my head. The implant broadcasts what I see as well as what I am currently thinking as well as what I am saying. It also broadcasts external speech that I hear, as well as broadcasts speech into the brain via the implant. I have photographic evidence of the scar. You need a computer with the correct software and hardware or a smartphone app to use the technology. When speech is broadcast into the brain from the implant, I am forced to repeat what is said with my internal voice. At first I did not know that I had the implant, but I knew something was going on because one morning when my alarm went off, to wake me for the computer course, I felt really groggy. As I do not drink, this is unusual. It made me realize that I had been drugged in the middle of the night. Since I had been drugged while I was sleeping, then that meant there had to be cameras in my house, otherwise they would not have known when I fell asleep. Because I was refusing to be picked up, the Prime Minister Tony Blair ordered the security services to assassinate me to cover up what they had done, but the agents refused to follow these orders and worked under a protest. The government then broadcast my house live on a TV channel on Sky between the summer of 2006 until I was sectioned the second time in October of 2006 in collaboration with Rupert Murdoch, in an attempt to force me to commit suicide. After the course finished, I was unemployed. Knowing that the cameras were still in my house, I told my brother about the cameras in my home. But because what happened was unbelievable, my brother then got in touch with the Mental Health Board in Scotland. After I agreed to see the mental health team at Florence Street Resource Centre, in Glasgow, as I did not know how to end this situation, I went to one meeting with a community psychiatric nurse, CPN. They then saw me at my home. Still knowing that there were cameras in my house, AP psychiatrist, Dr. John Taylor, came out to my home with a CPN. After I again told them that there were cameras in my home, the psychiatrist arranged for me to be sectioned on the 2nd of June, 2006. You should not get sectioned for saying that there are cameras in your house. 2 mental health nurses came to my home and tried to section me. When I refused to leave with them, they came back later with the police and arrested me and took me to Gartnavel in handcuffs. Gartnavel Hospital is not in my catchment area. Levendale is my catchment area. I have no idea why I was sectioned in a hospital outside of my catchment area, or why I was sectioned when my home was being illegally broadcast live on a channel on Sky. I was arrested using a short-term detention certificate, 3-day section, in which you are supposed to be assessed by a psychiatrist or a qualified nurse. I was in Gartnavel Hospital for 4 days without being assessed, as the NHS were too busy psychologically torturing me and attempting to have me murdered by a mental health patient. On the 4th day, when I was sent to the locked ward in Levendale Hospital, it was several days later before I had been seen by a psychiatrist. This extended time frame violated the terms of the short-term detention certificate. I had spent 2 months in Gartnavel and Levendale mental health hospitals in locked wards, Ward 1 in Levendale. During this time, the NHS had instigated a campaign of psychological torture and intimidation, as well as smearing me to the patients in Gartnavel Hospital. The NHS had lied to the patients and told them that I was a grass. This was done in an attempt to get a mental health patiento attack and kill me, in an attempt to cover up what the UK government had done to me, as the NHS had foreknowledge of the illegal human experiment. I was attacked on 2 occasions by a patient. The campaign of psychological torture and intimidation got so bad that I had to escape because I was in fear for my life. I was then forcibly taken back to Gartnavel Hospital by the police in handcuffs. After the first incident, when the staff were trying to get me to say what had happened and I had told them that nothing had happened, a patient then went outside of the smoking room and shouted his no grass. This patient was telling the staff that he knew that I was being smeared, as there is no other logical reason for him to leave the smoking room and shout out what he had said. After the final incident with a patient in Gartnavel, while I was waiting to be transferred to another hospital, the staff said that I was being sent to London. I was then transferred to Levendale Hospital. I cannot explain why the staff said London, other than the fact that I was illegally sectioned by the NHS in collaboration with the UK government. In Levendale, the campaign of psychological torture and intimidation started up again. The staff had lied to the patients. One of whom, a Rangers fan, said that I had contacts with the IRA. Once again, I can only explain these smears as another attempt to have a mental health patient kill me. One of the patients also said that he's getting killed tonight. The patients were told to say things to me as part of the NHS's campaign of intimidation. The NHS were hoping that if I was not killed by a patient, then I would snap and they could then send me to Carstairs, where I would have been given a lethal injection, since the NHS could not get a patient to kill me. I was then forcibly medicated against my will. I refused to take any antipsychotic medication, as it knew that the NHS were aware that I did not have an unsound mind, and that the NHS were wary of the fact that my house was being illegally broadcast on Sky. I was then assaulted by the staff nurses and forcibly taken to a cell and was illegally injected with the medication Clopixol Acufase. After several assaults by the staff and forced injections, I suffered from serious life-threatening side effects, and only then did I decide to take the prescribed medication that the NHS had originally forced me to take, olanzapine tablets, under a protest. I was also not allowed by the psychiatrist, Dr. Mike Taylor, to attend my first tribunal at 1 month. I then complained to a lawyer and the staff at Levendale Hospital about not being able to attend this tribunal. This is a violation of my human rights, Article 5, to have the section tried by an independent tribunal to test the legality of the section. I then won my 2-month tribunal and was released from hospital unconditionally, as I should never have been sectioned in the first place. During this time, the Daily Record, in collaboration with Foreign Secretary Jack Straw, were smearing me with insidious lies. They were smearing me as a paedophile, a grass, a fire starter, and that I was gay, in coincidental news articles, in an attempt to force me to commit suicide if I was not killed in Scotland. As the editor, Bruce Waddell, of the Daily Record knew what New Labour had done to me, because of all the smears, I then stopped watching the TV and buying newspapers. I then purchased an MP3 player as I was getting ready to leave the country for Ireland. I also phoned a lawyer to see if he could help me, but as I was unemployed, I could not afford to hire the lawyer since it was a civil case. I was then getting desperate and felt that I had no other option but to do a hunger strike. I stayed on the hunger strike for 4 weeks. I had also phoned the news media. Ethan felt that there was no point in starving myself in a protest, as it was getting me nowhere. 1 week later, I then started to hear a voice in my head. When the voice repeated something that he had thought in my mind, I then realized why I was drugged several months earlier. I realized that the government had ordered the security services to use me as an experiment in violation of Article 20 of the Helsinki Declaration, and put an implant in my brain to test the prototype in a field environment. Tony Blair and John Reid, who was Home Secretary at this time, ordered the security services to speak non-stop via the implant. This is physical torture and went on for 4.5 years until December 2010. The purpose of the torture was to force me to commit suicide. The broadcast from my mind was also broadcast live on a channel on Sky until 2007. When the agent speaking to me through the implant said that they were Scottish agents and that they had been ordered to pick me up and hand me over to their English counterparts, I came to the conclusion that I had to get out of the country. Since I was unemployed, I had to wait until my next giro. When it arrived, I booked a seat on the coach to Ireland. Then the agent speaking to me said that I would be stopped at the border. Thankfully, the coach crossed the border into the Irish Republic. When I was at my uncle's house, and I was still being broadcast, I realized that the implant must be broadcast on the mobile phone network. I then decided to come back to Scotland. When I got back to Scotland, I went to the Victoria Infirmary. When I told the staff at the hospital about what had happened, they sectioned me again at 2 a.m. on the 16th of October, 2006 in a locked ward, Ward 1. While I was in Levendale, and because of what had happened in Levendale during my first illegal incarceration when I refused to take the medication, I had decided to take the prescribed medication under a protest, as I did not want to be assaulted by the staff or to suffer the side effects of the medication clopixol acufase. I was then forced medicated with 4 different types of antipsychotics, olanzapine, risperidone, clozapine, and flufenazine, within a 6-month time span. This was an attempt to chemically lobotomize me to destroy my mind in order that I would forget about what went on in Gartnerville and Levendale hospitals during the first section. In Levendale Hospital, after I lost my second tribunal, I went on a hunger strike. After about 1 week, the staff nurses persuaded him to come off the hunger strike. During my incarceration in the hospital in a locked ward, the agents who were speaking to me via the implant informed me that they were working under a protest and that I should phone a lawyer and sue the government. When I tried this, the lawyer said he would phone me back, but the lawyer never did. While in the hospital, because I had absolutely no privacy and I was being force medicated, chemical lobotomy, I developed a version of Tourette's of the mind, ICD-10 code, F95.9 tic disorder numbers, which has the following symptoms: inner voice tics, complex inner voice tics that include inner voice palallalia tics and common complex inner voice tics, including inner voice echolalia, the repetition of words that I read or hear, and inner voice coprolalia tics, mostly obscene and also socially unacceptable, as my mind was being broadcast live on Sky and I was also the victim of a smear campaign by the Daily Record and the Sun newspapers. This can only be interpreted as psychological torture, since Tourette's of the mind makes you say things that are not true. Because of what the medication clozapine was doing to me, I was being constantly sick, I was sedated, and I knew that clozapine can affect your immune system, as I had to constantly give a blood sample so that the white blood cell count could be analyzed. I had tried to stop taking the tablets, but the staff noticed that I had put the tablet in my pocket, and from then on they had given me a liquid version of this medication so that I had no way of preventing the NHS from damaging me health with the medication that I was obviously allergic to. Just before my 6-month tribunal, my mental health officer, MHO, Azam Roshan, came to see me at hospital and he asked me to compromise. The NHS don't ask patients who they supposedly believe are schizophrenic to compromise. I agreed to compromise, but at my 6-month tribunal the NHS went all out to keep me institutionalized. Just 1 hour before my 6-month tribunal, the psychiatrist, Dr. Mike Taylor, had given me a drastically increased dosage of clozapine. During the tribunal I was forced to pause proceedings in order to be sick. I was also feeling very weak. When I went back to the tribunal, one of the panel members had asked me if I was given anything before attending the tribunal. The NHS had induced a chemically stuporous state on me in the hope that I would lose the tribunal. This attempt had worked, as I was then further detained illegally in this institution. While I was in Levendale Hospital, the psychiatrist told me that he was changing my medication from tablets and he was putting me on an injection, flufenazine. I then asked for a leaflet with its side effects. Later on I was then given a leaflet explaining what paranoid schizophrenia was instead of the injection side effects. I was intentionally misdiagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in an attempt to discredit me when I tried to get the story out, as the NHS could not get a patient to kill me. The NHS were forced to release me because I didn't tell them that I was hearing voices, and the psychiatrist, Dr. Mike Taylor, had just asked me how are the voices, and I told him I wasn't hearing any voices. I said this because I was trying to get released, and I knew that the mental health part of the NHS knew about the show on Sky and therefore what the UK government had done to me. After the second tribunal, 2 months, I had also started to tell the NHS that I did not have the implant in an attempt to get released. Up until the second tribunal I was telling the NHS that the UK government had put an implant in my brain. The NHS were collaborating with the UK government in an act of criminal conspiracy to cover up the illegal human experiment by trying to assassinate me. When the assassination attempt failed, they then tried to induce dissociative amnesia in me with the psychological torture and intimidation in combination with the chemical lobotomy. When I got back home, the agents who were speaking to me said that I should get in touch with the news media. So I went to the BBC studios and asked to see a journalist. When one came down and I told him my story, the journalist said that he would inform his boss and he took my contact details. When he did not phone me back, I then phoned the Guardian newspaper and the Sun newspaper and told them what had happened, but they did not cover the story despite the fact that the Sun is owned by the same company as Sky B, Rupert Murdoch's News International. Because the NHS were refusing to send me for a CT scan, I faked the symptoms of a brain tumor to a GP, Dr. Daniel Cumming, in order to get a CT scan. I received the CT scan on the 05/06/2007, but the implant was not on the CT scan. The Foreign Secretary Jack Straw had ordered GCHQ to hack my medical records and manipulate the part of my CT scan where the implant is located. After a while, I went on a hunger strike and I told my occupational therapist and key worker, Catherine McLeod, that I wouldn't come off it unless I got an MRI scan. She said she would send the crisis team to see me. The crisis team persuaded me to go and see the temporary psychiatrist, Dr. Singh, as Dr. John Taylor for some reason was no longer at Florence Street Resource Centre. A member of the crisis team had also attended this appointment. Dr. Singh agreed to send me for an MRI scan as long as I came off my hunger strike. I said I would not come off my hunger strike until I was in the scan room. The psychiatrist then refused me the MRI scan. Whilst at this appointment, the crisis team member told the psychiatrist to also put me on the medication olanzapine as well as my current medication flufenazine, which is known as an antipsychotic polypharmacy. This polypharmacy treatment has dangerous side effects which the NHS are aware of. I have evidence of the dangers of polypharmacy treatment. I then came off my hunger strike after almost 1 month and the crisis team stopped seeing me. He had also inquired about why my original psychiatrist, Dr. John Taylor, was no longer at Florence Street Resource Center. My key worker informed me that he had been promoted. I then got my head shaved to see if I could find a scar from the operation. I found one on the back of my head, a scar which I cannot explain being there, unless it is from the operation, as I have never had official brain surgery. I then did some research online into where the speech and hearing parts of the brain are. I discovered that there were multiple areas, including one at the back of the brain. The one at the back of the brain coincides with the scar on the back of my head. I have photographic evidence of the scar from the illegal brain surgery. Prime Ministers Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and David Cameron and Home Secretaries Charles Clarke, John Reid, Jackie Smith, Alan Johnson, and Theresa May have issued orders to assassinate a team and to torture me. The agents speaking to me via the implant stopped of their own accord in December of 2010, as there was no point in continuing to torture me. I then leaked the story of the implant in an expose video on YouTube on the 21st of November, 2012, as the news media were covering up this criminal experiment. I then had to upload another video on the 24/03/2013 because the first video had background music by the group Tangerine Dream, because I was worried that this could be used as an excuse to ban the video expose. I have photographic evidence of these dates from YouTube as well as the video expose. I also have photographic screenshots and audio recordings from the PLOS Biology Journal website containing similar research into broadcasting speech directly from the brain. I was left broadcasting from February 2006, and I will continue to be broadcast until I get the operation to remove the implant. In the summer of 2013, there was an organized leak by the United Kingdom and United States security services involving the American NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, who then leaked this story to an American journalist, Glenn Greenwald, who worked for the Guardian newspaper. I then believed that I was getting help to get this story out, in amongst their expose of the NSA and GCHQ scandals. Unfortunately, the British establishment helped the government to kill the story. I believed the Guardian journalists were helping me to try and get the history out despite the ongoing cover-up. It was only Glenn Greenwald who was trying to help me to get this story out. At the beginning of September, I was telling the media that I had already received a CT scan, but that it was manipulated by the government to remove the image of the implant, and that I was intending to use the Data Protection Act to get this CT scan. On the 6th of September, 2013, Glenn Greenwald used an article in the Guardian newspaper letting me know that the security services can hack your medical records, and thereby giving me more evidence that my CT scan was manipulated. I have photographic evidence of this article. I was listening to a football match on the radio on the 24th of September, 2013, when I heard some strange words used by the commentators. Sheik Young said something about someone wanting money, and I thought in response that I do not want any money for this story. I had thought this because an American whistleblower had already gotten the story to the media. Soon after, Sheik Young said the boy's not interested in the money. They also said something about winning it in Scotland. After I heard this, I came to the conclusion that the BBC were trying to get me to go to their headquarters to say what the government had done, but when I went there nothing happened. So I went back to give a BBC journalist a USB drive containing evidence several days later. They did not get back in touch. Because of that broadcast, I decided to record the next Celtic match on my SKY box that I was going to listen to in case it happened again, as I could not remember everything that they had said. The next match that I had listened to on the 24th of September, 2013 contained several keywords that were meant to be picked up by me. Earlier that morning I was going to buy cigarettes in ASDA, whilst in the queue I spotted a New Scientist magazine with the headline "Thought, as I have an illegal government implant in my brain that broadcasts my thoughts, I could not resist buying the magazine." There was a Private Eye magazine right next to the New Scientist magazine, and I was trying to remember, is that Ian Hislop's magazine? Later that night during the commentary I once again heard several keywords. Including in part 1 of the recording at 5 minutes and 10 seconds, Sheik Young started to talk about Private Eye magazine. Then again at 13 minutes and 49 seconds I heard psychological, and at 15 minutes and 6 seconds they started to talk about Jim Duffy, the ex-manager. This is also my family name and the name of my brother. In part 2 of the recording, it went into extra time, so I had to set the SKY box to record the rest of the match. I heard the saying he hashed it up twice in a 30-minute period. While this is a normal football statement, it is unusual to hear it twice in a small time period. I had taped the SKY recording of part 1 onto my MP3 player and transferred it onto a USB drive for safekeeping, but for some idiotic reason I forgot to tape part 2 onto my MP3 player. I had also went back down to ASDA to take some photographic evidence of the 2 magazines, ATH magazine stand, as well as buying the Private Eye magazine, so I would have 2 receipts. One from earlier in the day of the football radio broadcast, The New Scientist, that I already had, and then the other receipt from the following day, of the Private Eye magazine which I had just bought that day. I then went to London to try and get the story out because of a newspaper, The Guardian, and music radio station, Planet Rock, Sting. When I got back to Scotland I then taped part 2 of the broadcast onto my MP3 player, but while listening to it again I only heard the saying he hashed it up once at 16 minutes and 34 seconds. My SKY box also now had an error in the TV guide. The mini TV screen was no longer working and said on it no signal is being received. This was a message from the security services letting me know that my SKY box was hacked. I then recorded the guide onto my video camera for safekeeping and for further evidence. While I was in London, the government ordered the security services to hack my SKY box and fix part 2 of the recording, and remove one of the hashed it up comments. They had this done because I was refusing to pay the TV license fee, while the BBC, because of the Director General Lord Patton and the BBC Trust and senior management, were not covering my story, and they were collaborating with the government to cover up this story, which is a violation of the BBC Charter. They are meant to be impartial, and also because it is unusual to hear that statement more than once in a short period of time. The fact that it happened in 2 different football matches is proof of an insidious criminal conspiracy involving the UK government, the NHS and UK establishment media, including the BBC, in an attempt to assassinate me, as they were hoping that I would say in a court of law that I was picking up messages from the radio, which is considered to be schizophrenic, because I was refusing to pay my license fee. As I have already been intentionally misdiagnosed with this illness, the government and the BBC Trust were trying to have me sectioned again, where the NHS would have assassinated me with a lethal dose of poison in an attempt to cover up this story, because an American NSA whistleblower had already gotten the story to an American journalist from Rio, who worked for the Guardian newspaper, but were prevented from covering it by the British establishment media, the Scott Trust, News International, Trinity Mirror, the BBC, and Sky. I also believe that the commentators were lied to about the nature of the broadcast. They thought they were testing or training a would-be agent to see if I would fall for a sting. I received the disc containing my manipulated CT scan on the 7th of October, 2013. My CT scan contained an anomaly in one of the images of the brain, as well as 3 exact images of the same side of my skull. This was done by GCHQ to prove to me that my CT scan was manipulated on the orders of the UK government to cover up what was done to me, as the security services are working under a protest. I have this disc containing my manipulated CT scan. On the 22nd of October, 2013, I was intending to listen to Celtic play Ajax, and because of the previous 2 matches I had to record it again. Once again I picked up 2 statements which were meant for me. Both of them were at the start of the match, the first at 6 minutes and 33 seconds of the recording. 44 seconds into the match, Peter Grant said take the sting out of the game. Then at 7 minutes and 9 seconds, 1 minute and 18 seconds into the match, Murdo MacLeod also said take the sting out of the start. The journalists at BBC Scotland have realised what was going on with the previous matches that he had listened to, as I had by then given them a USB drive containing evidence, and they were now trying to help me prove that the government were trying to sting me during the previous 2 games. The government and the establishment then went on the offensive against the Guardian newspaper with the aid of the establishment-owned media including the Daily Mail, owned by Jonathan Harmsworth, 4th Viscount Rothermere, and The Sun, owned by Rupert Murdoch, as well as the government threatening legal action against the Guardian newspaper, although this was just an elaborate ruse to fool me into trusting the Guardian newspaper as I had lost all trust in the British media. In October of 2013, the Cameron government along with the British establishment news media via The Guardian tried to sting me via a music radio station, Planet Rock. The radio station was stung into believing they were helping me to get the story out, but the purpose was to assassinate me and make me a missing person. When this failed, the government then ordered the security services to poison me in a hotel room, Premier Inn, York Way, London, on the 26th of September, 2013, while I was sleeping. I have screenshots of my bank statement of the train and hotel bank debits, which were credited on the 24th of September, 2013, the train, and the 25th of September, 2013, the Premier Inn hotel. Whenever I give blood via a needle, a bruise mark appears on my skin. I had an unexplained bruise in my arm after I woke up. David Cameron and Theresa May had ordered the security services to poison me. When I came back to Scotland, I was given an antidote, but I was incapacitated for over 14 hours. I had no energy to move and I had a pounding headache for the same amount of time. I was given an antidote because the agents are still working under a protest because of the nature of technology and the threat it poses to humankind. The Israeli security services, Mossad, had also told the Guardian newspaper that I was poisoned and given an antidote in a coincidental news article in an attempt to help me gather more proof of what was done to me. I have a photographic screenshot from the Guardian of this article. The radio station, Planet Rock, then tried to warn me to leave the country. I decided that because of the nature of the implant and the fact that I have no privacy, I was as well staying in my country and to try and bring the government down. This is because the implant works on the mobile phone networks no matter what country I am in. The journalists from the Guardian newspaper were continuing to fool me into believing that they were helping me with the aid of the radio station by giving me information via news stories in their papers which contain information in a coincidental way in what I believed was an attempt to get around the cover-up. It was only Glenn Greenwald who was helping me to get the story out. Because the story was out, as Edward Snowden, the ex-NSA whistleblower, had leaked the story to the Guardian newspaper in the summer of 2013, and I was trying to bring down the government, the British establishment media, via the Scott Trust, the Guardian newspaper's owners and the BBC, then released the smartphone app on app stores so that another show was on. At this point I did not know that my mind was public again. The people of Glasgow then informed me in code that the government and the British establishment had put the show back on via a smartphone app. I then once again had absolutely no privacy every second. The Guardian newspaper editor, Alan Rusbridger, then started to smear me with coincidental articles in his newspaper, because I had already developed Tourette's syndrome of the mind, tic disorder numbers, from the first show. The new smear campaign had made my illness much worse and I was being psychologically tortured once again. This was done in an attempt to force me to commit suicide. Towards the end of October, the Guardian newspaper attempted another sting by using the radio station and articles in the Guardian newspaper. They were attempting to trick me into going down to London and to stay in a cottage to get the story out, but the real reason was to kill me on Halloween and make me a missing person. This was done because the Guardian newspaper is owned by the Scott Trust, who are also the establishment, and I was trying to bring down the UK government as well as the British establishment media, and also because I was saying that the establishment had plans to depopulate and implant the population. I have photographic screenshots of articles from this sting. Because of the establishment cover-up, I was forced to buy counter-surveillance equipment. I had bought 2 types of counter-surveillance equipment earlier which couldn't detect the implant. The implant broadcasts outside of their frequency bandwidth. I then started to search for more expensive professional counter-surveillance equipment. While watching the film Red 2, I spotted one of the detectors that I had researched, which was placed in a scene from the film, in order to help me. There were also various messages in the first Red film aimed at me. I have evidence of the purchase of these counter-surveillance equipment. Both of the films Red 1 and Red 2 were whistleblowing leaks by the United Kingdom and the United States security services in the form of coded movie scripts, as the security services are bound by the Official Secrets Act of their respected countries, and therefore the leaks had to be in the form of codes contained within the scripts in the films. I have evidence from both of these films. I then decided to try and buy the counter-surveillance equipment from Red 2 in order to prove without a doubt what the government had done to me, and also to prove to the normal part of their NHS, so that I could get a CT scan and then get the operation to remove the implant in a televised operation, so that everyone knows about the implant technology, as that's the only way to destroy Asocret technology. My brother-in-law came to visit me. He had a drink in him, and I noticed that my brother-in-law was worried about something. During this visit, my brother-in-law informed me that my niece was attacked in a kebab shop in St Andrews, where she is studying at the establishment St Andrews University. At the time I took this literally, but I later discovered that my brother-in-law was speaking in code, as he knew why his daughter had gotten into St Andrews University. It was a veiled threat to me, and he was telling me to go to court to get the story out, as he also knew this was the UK establishment threatening his daughter to silence her uncle. I then attempted to send a letter containing documents and a DVD to WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who is receiving sanctuary in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. I had sent them by registered post, as I was wondering if WikiLeaks would receive them. The letter was signed by Somione, but WikiLeaks informed me in a coincidental way on their website that they did not receive the letter. Because I knew that the implant's broadcast was being listened to by journalists, I then attempted to fight back the only way I could. As the newspapers were covering up the story, I started to smear the British government and the establishment in my own propaganda campaign, and to try and unify everyone in an attempt to destroy the implant, and because I knew that unless you have a free press then you can't have a democracy, and the British press were attempting to cover up the biggest news scandal in Britain's history. I was also forced to use lyrics from music in an attempt to get this story out, as I had developed an insidious illness, tic disorder numbers, which I refer to as Tourette's of the mind, which was like Aidmon smearing me and everyone who was attempting to help me. Because of the things that I was saying, which were embarrassing the British government and the British establishment, William Hague had then done the same back to me in targeted adverts on websites that I was using, as I had once again done a media blackout because of the smear campaign. William Hague was feeding my Tourette's illness in a way which made me smear my family in an insidious way, as Tourette's syndrome of the mind makes you say things that you do not intend to say with your internal voice, and my internal voice was being broadcast via the implant. The reason the establishment media were trying to drive me insane and put the show back on was because they feared me saying publicly that the establishment ruled Britain and that the UK Parliament was a puppet parliament, and they had hoped that I would refuse to be interviewed while I had Tourette's of the mind, tic disorder numbers, and my mind was public. BBC Scotland's journalists were trying to help me to get around the cover-up. They were using coincidental stories on their radio station, Radio Scotland, and the BBC's website, along with Glasgow's Real Radio music station. The British Security Services, MI5, were also giving me advice in code using hidden clickers in my house, as well as attempting to keep me alive. I was now forced to consider leaving Scotland, as it had been impossible to get around the government cover-up, as well as being too much of a risk to my life to try and be a whistleblower in Britain, as the British government and establishment have already tried to assassinate me, including being poisoned, and I couldn't rely on being administered any more antidotes. My psychiatrist, Dr. Pavan Sri Reddy, at Florence Street Resource Centre, was also refusing to send me for a CT scan, despite the fact that he knew that I had the implant and that I was being psychologically tortured as he was speaking in code to me, and he also knew that I could not get a lawyer in Scotland, so therefore he had access to the smartphone app. He was also threatening to section me again. I had bought 2 books by the author Ian M. Banks, which were Consider Phlebas and The Player Off Games. I was then applying the plot of these books against the British establishment media in me propaganda campaign. I had borrowed £1,000 from Glasgow's credit union to purchase professional counter-surveillance equipment, or if that failed, to try and get to Ireland. My Tourette's illness had also started to say an Irish saying all the time, which was "that's grand." I went in person to a spy equipment shop in Stockport, online spy shop, but the government had ordered the security services to take over the shop. While I was in the shop to buy the bug detector, the agent who was there said that the bug detector had not arrived yet, and he also advised me in code to leave the country. I had decided to try one more spy equipment store, this time in London, Spymaster. But unfortunately the same thing happened. The government had taken over the store. The agent said in code that he knew that I had the implant. He said 3 people had also come into the shop and said they had an implant, thereby letting me know that I would not be able to purchase the equipment in the UK. On the way back to the train station, I had decided to go to Ireland. While travelling on the train to Scotland, a group of agents gave me good advice in a coincidental manner. I then left Scotland for Ireland on the 30th of November, 2013. While travelling to Donegal on a coach through Northern Ireland, I heard on the radio that the Irish people knew about the show. While staying in a hotel, Station House Hotel, in Letterkenny, the locals and the IRA as well as the Irish security services helped me by giving me advice and keeping me alive while I was attempting to travel to Dublin to try and get the story out. On the journey to Dublin, the Irish security services informed me in a coincidental way that the mobile phone app was placed in the public domain, as I had thought that the show was just in Scotland, like the first show. I had developed a code system from the first show in 2006 so that I could get help. The codes were 1, no; 2, yes; 3, trust; 4, Ireland or media; 5, money; 6, Glasgow; 7, me; 8, great or hate; 9, police; 11, me; 15, MI5; 16, MI6. That code system was used by everyone to communicate with mine 2006 as well as in 2013. The Irish people also started to say "that's grand" to me as a code to let them know that they were listening to the show. I was reading books downloaded onto my Kindle so that the Irish Security Services, Defence Forces Directorate of Intelligence, could communicate with me in code via clickers that were hidden in my hotel room, and they were also trying to keep me alive long enough to get to an Irish politician, who I knew was supportive of whistleblowers, as well as trying the Irish media so that I could get the history out and go to an Irish hospital to get the operation to remove the implant and save my life. The Irish security services let me know in code that there was a camera in my hotel room so that I could get to sleep without fear of being poisoned, as I had already been poisoned in a London hotel. I gave my evidence to Amnesty International in Ireland, as I could not send letters in the UK without them being intercepted by the UK government. They said that they would send them to Amnesty International in the UK. I had also sent some documents to a German newspaper, Der Spiegel. Amnesty International were giving me advice in coincidental news articles to help me to expose the implant to the world. I have photographic evidence of my email contact with Amnesty International. On the 9th of December, 2013, I went to see RTE, Ireland's main TV station, to make an appointment with a journalist at around 11 o'clock. The receptionist said the journalist was out on a story but that they would phone back. When I got back to my hotel, the Maple Hotel, I then went on to the news websites. I then discovered that a woman was attacked in her hotel room around about the same time as I was going to see RTE. Her hotel, Isaac's Hostel on Frenchman's Lane, was a 2-minute walk away from my hotel. The woman was attacked on floor number 3 in room number 311. These numbers are code numbers. The number 3 is my code for trust and the number 11 is one of my code numbers for myself. David Cameron and William Hague and the UK establishment media, including the BBC, in an act of criminal conspiracy, had paid a foreign national to attack her with a knife in order to send Sage to the Irish media not to interview me and cover this story. I had then decided to go back to Scotland as I was not prepared to put any more Irish people at risk from the British government and establishment, as I was the one with the death sentence. I then intended to get this story out by going to court, either with a famous law firm in England as I can't get a Scottish law firm because of the fear factor, or by representing myself in a court of law. When I was staying in a hotel, Letterkenny Court Hotel, on the night of the 10th of December, 2013 in Donegal, a stopover back to Scotland, I checked the Irish news websites again and found out that on the morning of the 10th of December, 2013 at 3:30 a.m., 4 gunshots were fired into the door of a hotel, Sunnybank Hotel, in Dublin. I knew this was a warning by the British government to me not mention what had happened in Ireland, as my code for Ireland is 4 and my code for trust is 3, and an MI6 agent had already spoken in code. He had said 14 printouts, meaning no Ireland printout, in an internet cafe in Dublin while I was printing a revised statement on the morning of the 10/12/2013 to include the Dublin knife attack. I have evidence of my stay in all 3 hotels in Ireland. While waiting for the coach to Scotland in Letterkenny in Donegal on the 11th of December, 2013, a foreign national was also waiting for the coach. He started to speak to me in code. No one speaks to me directly because of the fact that the implant broadcasts the version of Tourette's that I developed, which also describes what I see. The foreign national also kept on checking his phone and then started to say things. The foreign national was saying things and showing me pictures in an attempt to make me smear myself. He was also threatening to kill me in a coincidental way. He also asked if I had any cards while we were on the coach, which I took as a reference to the establishment's game. The British establishment had promised to pay him to kill me. I knew this because the foreign national did not have much money to spend, and I knew that he was receiving instructions on his mobile phone. On the coach I was communicating with the Irish radio, RTE Radio 2, via the implant to let them know my suspicions, and they were agreeing with me. There were only 6 passengers on the coach. At port in Larne, the port security took all the luggage off the bus. When your luggage is taken from the bus you have to get off for a customs check. Only the foreign national did not get off. It is also unusual for all of the luggage to be taken off the coach, as they usually only take some of the luggage off the coach. When the coach arrived at the Port Kenryan in Scotland, the police took the foreign national and off the coach to check our IDs. The foreign national did not have any ID or luggage. The police then refused to allow him to continue to travel on the coach. The police also took details from me about where I was, my passport details, and which hotel I had stayed in when I was in Dublin on a written form, which I had to fill in and sign. A policewoman then spoke to me in code. She said that's grand, to let me know that they were listening to the show and that they also had the same suspicions. The police saved my life so that I could try to get this story out in Britain. I have evidence from the police proving that I was stopped and searched at the port in Scotland. In my home in Scotland, I went back online to Der Spiegel's website to see if they had any advice. In one of their articles they were advising me not to try and get to RT News Channel in London to try and get the story out. They were also adopting the same tactics as The Guardian. The editor, Wolfgang Buchner, was smearing me and giving me false advice. I then went to the police station at Aikenhead Road in Glasgow to try and report all of these crimes and death attempts and threats, since I knew that the police had the smartphone app, and that they were therefore listening. Otherwise they would not have known about the foreign national on the coach back to Scotland. The police refused to take my statement or help to save my life, which is a violation of Article 2, Right to Life, of the UK Human Rights Act 1998, because their chief constable, Stephen House, was collaborating with the UK government. I had also checked RT's website to see if I could find any info. There were 2 articles. One of them made me think that RT knew about the show, and the other was from the Russian Security Services, Federal Security Services (FSB), which was threatening to explode this story if I was killed while attempting to get the story out. While I was going to London on a train, on the 22nd of January, 2014, in an attempt to get to a London civil lawyer and give them my evidence, the police chief, Stephen House, ordered one of his officers to go on the train in an attempt to psychologically torture me, as I was threatening to report him to the Procurator Fiscal for not investigating these crimes, since my life is under serious threat. On my way back to Scotland on the same day, the English police did the same thing. They were psychologically torturing me in an attempt to force me to cover up what Stephen House was doing. I knew this because they showed me things to let me know that it was Stephen House that they were defending. I have photographic evidence of my train tickets. On the 5th of January, 2014, the ASIO, Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, contacted me on my Irish mobile phone with a text message. The text contained a coincidental message using a company from a small Pacific island. It was referring to the plot of a TV series that I had just watched, Last Resort, which was about a nuclear submarine captain and his crew who were trapped at a small Pacific island, and who were trying to bring down their government, who were traitors. Since I had always called the implant a nuclear weapon and the UK government traitors, they were telling me to explode this story since this technology is a threat to all of humanity, and they were also letting me know that the app show was public amongst security services and journalists all over the planet. Glasgow's taxis, Hampden private cabs as well as other private cabs and Glasgow black hack cabs, continue to give me advice every time I uses them, in an attempt to help to keep me alive whenever there is a sting against me, as well as helping me to try and get the story out. Also, while I was on a train to London, 3 English people let me know in code that the people in England have access to the app show, as I was thinking it was just the Glasgow and Irish civilians that knew about the show. I now knew that the app show was public all over the planet. While watching CCTV, China's English language news channel, I picked up a message from the MSS, Ministry of State Security of the People's Republic of China, telling him that the World Security Services had united to try and get this story out. They also told me to trust Russia. On the 24th of January, 2014, I was watching Arise Nation, South Africa's news channel, to see if they also knew. After several minutes, they sent me a message saying they also knew about the smartphone app show. On the 25th of January, 2014, at around 22:15, while I was watching a video on YouTube, a targeted coincidental advert from the government, David Cameron and William Hague, in collaboration with the Scott Trust, Dame Liz Forgan, Alan Rusbridger, Emily Bell, Alex Graham, Andrew Graham, Will Hutton, Maleha Malik, Andrew Miller, Anthony Sauls, Jonathan Scott, Heather Stewart and Philip Tranter, the Daily Mail's owner, Jonathan Harmsworth, 4th Viscount Rothermere, the BBC Trust, Lord Patton of Barnes, Diane Coyle, Sonata Aline, Richard Eyre, Alison Hastings, David Liddermont, Bill Matthews, Susanna Tavern and Lord Williams of Baglan, the Daily Record, Trinity Mirror, Simon Fox, Vijay Vogello, Mark Hollins Head, Jane Lightning, Paul Vickers, David Grigson, Gary Hoffman, Donald Smith, Helen Stevenson and Lee Ginsberg, and News International, Rupert Murdoch and James Murdoch, came on threatening to murder my niece, who is studying at St Andrews Uni, unless I accepted being broadcast publicly for the rest of my life. As I had not taken a screenshot, I kept asking the security services to resend the advert. They did so at 3:30 a.m. and I then took the screenshot. After a while further researching the media, I went back onto RT News. They informed Methat, the Director General, DG, of one of the security services, GCHQ, was intending to resign. I believe the DG intends to resign because of all the grief he was getting from the Conservative government, because the DG was refusing to destroy all the evidence that I had on my computers and USB drives. When I went to the Govanhill Health Centre, at the end of January 2014, to get my antipsychotic medicine, which I was not taking as it had chemically lobotomized me and I had been intentionally misdiagnosed, the staff at the chemist gave me 1 tablet and a receipt for 27 more. This was to let them know that they knew about the show, as these are code numbers. The chemists were saying that they knew I was not taking the tablets. 1 tablet means NO tablet, and they were also saying by giving me 27 tablets, yes 7, my code for yes and myself. Also, the chemists would never give a patient just 1 tablet. I have taken a scanned image of the box of tablets with the pharmacist label for further evidence. It was also part of a sting by the NHS and the UK government, as several days later, while I was on Planet Rock's website, an advert from the NHS was used to try and sting me. The advert said if you have an emergency, go to the NHS or your pharmacy ASAP. I believed at the time that this was aimed sage by the NHS telling me to go to the hospital to get the operation. I have photographic evidence of this advert. While I was watching the press preview show on Sky News on Thursday morning the 30th of January, 2014, it picked up several death threats. One of them was from a newspaper article which contained "Rest in Peace and War." The camera then zoomed in on these headlines. The other was said by a columnist which was shot by the Met, meaning Metropolitan Police. I then watched the BBC News 24th hour and picked up more threats which were killed by foreign nationals, and they also show Ida cruise missile being launched, which was the media telling me why they had issued the death threats. The reason was that I had just been to the Procurator Fiscal to hand in my evidence to start an investigation against the Police Scotland Chief Constable, and I had always called this event launching my nuclear missile. Because I had developed Tourette's of the mind, tic disorder numbers, because of the implant and the news media's smear campaign, as well as the chemical lobotomy, which says things that I do not mean to say, one of which was I am scared, I then responded to this Tourettic tic, which I refer to as a pop-in, by saying I am taking my hood off to show the government that I am not scared even. Although I am in fear for my life. I then took my hood off as there are hidden cameras in my house. The BBC then showed a zoom-in close-up of someone's eyes in response, which was the BBC essaying they had heard me and they knew that I was not scared as they know I have Tourette's of the mind, tic disorder numbers. On my way back from an appointment with a physio at Govanhill Health Centre on the afternoon of the 30th of January, 2014 for damage to my knee, I was complaining about the death threats from the media. A police riot van drove past me and I commented that maybe the police were angry about the media using them in a death threat against me. Not long after, another police riot van drove past me and the officer touched his ear to let me know that the police had heard me say this and that I was correct in his assumption. As I was walking past the police station, there was also what I assumed was a plainclothes police officer outside of the station. He was holding a mobile phone in his hand and he looked at me, as the police are also working under a protest. This is also how the people of Glasgow let me know that they are watching out for me when I am outside of my home. I had also received a reply from the Procurator Fiscals, on the 6th of February, 2014, acknowledging the fact that they had received my evidence and were looking at them. The security services were also giving me advice while I am in my house. They are using clicker-sound short flashes of my light bulb to communicate with me at certain words from books that I was reading or lyrics from tunes that I am listening to, as well as when I was writing my statement, as I was trying to get a lawyer to sue the UK government. On the morning of the 11th of February, 2014, I went to the Southern General Hospital to get a CT scan and their operation, as I knew that the NHS were not the only part of planet Earth not to know about the show, and they had also sent me a message via the targeted advert on Planet Rock's website, as well as the message from the pharmacy in collaboration with the UK government. On the bus to the hospital, I noticed the headline in the Glasgow edition of the Metro newspaper, "It's Aid, so you all think it is over." I was then wondering, did the Metro know something that I did not? While in the hospital after I was taken in to see a GP, the staff left me waiting for 20 minutes. A member of the hospital staff then walked into a storeroom and looked at me while pulling a large Black & Decker box, which I took as a reference to the Pogues tune Streets of Sorrow Birmingham 6 from the album If I Should Fall from Grace with God, which I was using as propaganda because of the lyrics that several of the tunes in the album contained. Streets of Sorrow Birmingham 6 contained the lyrics "shot in the back of the head," which I always then responded to by saying "drilled in the back of the head." The tune also contained the lyrics "I'll not return to feel more sorrow," which I always kept saying I was trying to achieve, as well as several more lines of lyrics which I was applying to my current situation, including the verses "tortured the innocent, tortured and framed by the law, through the last 6 years I've lived through terror and for the price of a promotion," which I was using against the news media, the Scottish Police Chief and the mental health part of the NHS, as the psychiatrist Dr. John Taylor had already been given his promotion and the Police Chief Constable Stephen House was trying to get promoted to the Metropolitan Police, since while he was in post at Strathclyde Police, after being contacted by Home Office officials, Stephen House had applied to become the Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis following the resignation of Sir Paul Stevenson. Not long after, a nurse walked by at a normal speed until she reached me. She then walked very slowly and looked down at her feet for several seconds, thereby telling me to leave the hospital. The Black & Decker box was the staff at the hospital letting me know that they were aware of the show and that they were about to send me a message. I refused to leave the hospital as I was forcing the NHS to make their decision public as I was being psychologically tortured. I then started saying while I was waiting that the NHS had already chemically lobotomized me and that they were committing several violations of the UK Human Rights Act, as well as keeping me and my nieces in physical danger of being murdered, which is a violation of Article 2, the right to life, as the NHS are legally obligated to save my life since they know that I have survived 4 assassination attempts, as well as the fact that my niece had also had a death threat issued against her. I was also now aware that the NHS advert was a sting to put me in a mental institution. A nurse then walked by and touched her ear, thereby letting me know that the NHS had heard me saying these things. After 5 or 10 minutes, a GP, Ewan McTavish, came to see me. While talking to him, I had also showed him a picture of my scar and he examined the back of my head. The GP then spoke in code. He said that's grand, to confirm that not only did the NHS know about the show but that the NHS board, Chairman Andrew Robertson OBE, and the management were collaborating with the UK government in an act of criminal conspiracy and were refusing to give me the CT scan and operation to save my life. I was also now careful to not say anything which would force the hospital staff to section me, as that was why the nurse had warned me to leave the hospital and why the GP Ewan McTavish had spoken in code. They were also working under a protest as they must have been outraged at being forced to lie to me and at not being able to offer me the life-saving CT scan and operation. On my way back home, I was travelling in a taxi. The driver had the radio on BBC Radio 2. The station then played several tunes aimed at me. One of these tunes was to persuade me to go to BB Scotland's HQ, which I had said that I would soon be passing. This was an attempt to delude me into going there and receiving another knockback from the BBC. They were hoping that this combined with the knockback from the NHS would make me snap, and then I would be put into Carstairs mental prison where I was meant to be assassinated by a lethal injection. It was also an attempt by the BBC Trust to get revenge on BBC Scotland for helping me to try and get the story out despite the cover-up. I knew this because on the 10th of February, 2014, while I was travelling to London to hand in an application to the Royal Courts of Justice's Legal Advice Bureau to try and get a pro bono lawyer, the staff on the train informed everyone that the train would be late because of an electrical problem at Carstairs. This was the UK government and establishment telling me and the whole world that I would be sectioned there the following day when I went to the Southern General Hospital as I had previously announced. The week before that, I would be going there on the 11th of February, 2014, after trying the Royal Courts of Justice's Legal Advice Service. When I got back home, I went online to find out how could the Metro newspaper have known that I was not getting the operation. I then found out that the Metro, Glasgow edition, is owned by Jonathan Harmsworth, 4th Viscount Rothermere, the Daily Mail owner, as well as having a partnership with Trinity Mirror, the Daily Records owners. This confirmed that the NHS board were collaborating with the UK establishment to prevent me from receiving the operation. I had also developed post-traumatic stress disorder, ICD code F43.1, because of the illegal experiment, the psychological torture and intimidation by the NHS, the chemical lobotomy, as well as all of the assassination attempts and all of the death threats by the UK government and their establishment media against me and my family. On the 17th of February, 2014, I went to my dentist at 2:55 p.m. I was taken into a different room from my dentist's normal room. The reason was that this other room contained a computer screen that the patients can see. On the screen were the numbers 184, Surgery 3. These are code numbers meaning No Hate Ireland Surgery Trust, Ireland, 4, had also now morphed into No Cover-Up because of what had happened in Dublin, as my codes can be adapted. The staff had also spoken in code using the number 7 as well as saying GP3. They also said that their big boss was in seeing them. This was them referring to the chairman of the NHS. The staff also mentioned the colours black and blue. Black is my surname in Irish Gaelic, and I was also always mentioning this, and blue was used by an English passenger on a trip to London. He had a book that he was showing me, the title of which was Blue Remembered Earth, as I was also calling myself a Blue Woad Warrior because I am Scottish. The book was about a family's secret and in-game show talk propaganda. I was calling the editor of the Guardian newspaper my father. While I was leaving, the receptionist also received a phone call and said into the phone, "Just pop in on your way home." The dentists were stung into stinging me, and as I had also always said that my dentist was honest, the NHS thought that I would believe her and fall for the sting. The NHS were hoping that I would go into the Victoria Infirmary on my way back home from the dentist, and then I would be sectioned as I had just handed in a written formal complaint to the NHS about what had happened at the Southern General Hospital, and I was in the process of writing a statement for a court summons, which because of the implant and the smartphone app the NHS were aware of. On the 20th of February, 2014 at 14:52 I had received a phone call from my community psychiatric nurse, CPN, Stuart Reid. My CPN said that the NHS complaints manager had sent the letter of complaint that I had handed in to the Western Infirmary Complaints Department had been sent to Florence Street Resource Centre and that he wanted to come straight out and see me. He had also said that he had phoned my mobile earlier. I was coming back from the credit union and then I was going to my sister's house while listening to music on an MP3 player, and this was why I had missed the calls. The missed phone calls were logged on my phone at 14:04 and 2 of them at 14:27. I was wondering why the letter was sent to Florence Street Resource Centre. I also then said that I was no longer playing games with the NHS while they were continuing to try and sting me to section me in order that the NHS could get the psychiatrist, Dr. Mike Taylor, to assassinate me. I then started to plan what to say to my CPN. One of the questions I had decided to ask my CPN was, when did the NHS send the letter to Florence Street? As the night before I was on the EU Human Rights Court's website researching case reports of people's court cases, in order to use them in my court case as precedents. I had said that if the NHS had sent the letter that day, then that would prove that the NHS were listening illegally to my research via the Implant and smartphone app, and that they were worried that I would be able to win my case. This was the reason the NHS had sent the letter to Florence Street, as they were hoping that Florence Street Resource Centre would section me using my letter of complaint as justification. When my CPN arrived at my home, he said that the psychiatrist, Dr. Pavan Sri Reddy, had told him to visit me. I had then asked my CPN when did Florence Street receive the letter. My CPN replied that they had just received the letter that day when he had phoned me, but that the letter was first sent to a different Stuart Reid by mistake. The NHS sending the letter that day was the NH responding to my private thoughts and plans from the day before and then making an unscheduled appointment with me. Which proves without a doubt that the NHS are monitoring the app show from the implant to illegally spy on my plans to get around the cover-up and my preparation work for the court case. I had phoned my mobile phone operator, Orange, to ask them to send me a statement containing the phone numbers that I had received and the external calls that I had made. The staff at Orange had agreed to send me the statement. I have still not received this statement as the UK government are intercepting my mail and the Conservative government have stolen this vital piece of evidence. On the morning of the 25th of February, 2014, while I was in my bed, my memory had started to recall the events of the first section in Gartnerville and Levendale hospitals. This was because the intentional chemical lobotomy as well as the psychological torture and intimidation had induced dissociative amnesia, ICD-10 code F44.0, on me. The whole planet who were listening at this time had heard this recall. As my memory had come back in bits, I had to keep getting up to write down in Annotepad what my memory was recalling. My memory took no longer than 1 hour to recall the events of the first section as I was analyzing the bits of memory that were coming back to me, which then made more memories come flooding back. The fact that the NHS had foreknowledge of the implant and then tried to cover up the implant before I knew what was in my brain, since I did not know that I had the implant during my first incarceration, can only be explained by the fact that it must have been an NHS surgeon who embedded the implant into the parietal lobe of my brain. This is the only logical reason as to why the NHS had tried to assassinate me and were continuing to cover up the implant which should have and could have been used to cure the mute and give them the gift of speech. That evening I then decided to rewatch Red 1 and Red 2 in case there were any more messages that I had missed, as my mind was in the process of repairing itself from the chemical lobotomy and since the memory recall of that morning I had thought that I might be better able to analyze these films, since both of them were aimed at me. I have written 2 statements containing all of the coded messages from the security services contained in these films. By the 17th of March, 2014 I have still not heard any more from the Procurator Fiscal Service, headed by the Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland, about the evidence that I had handed in about the criminal cover-up committed by Police Scotland's Chief Constable, Stephen House. This is despite the fact that myself and my nieces have received several more death threats from the establishment media, and I'm still being psychologically tortured and publicly humiliated. I had also developed post-viral fatigue syndrome, ICD-10 code G93.3, because of the continued acute stress of having absolutely no privacy either awake or asleep since my dream speech is also broadcast, as well as because of all of the assassination attempts and psychological torture by the UK government and the establishment media. The NHS Complaints Department were also refusing to deal with the letter of complaint about being denied life-saving medical treatment, and they were giving me the runaround every time that I had phoned them after the expiry of the NHS's own deadline for replying to complaints. I have also recorded these phone calls for evidence, as I had intended to take the UK government and the NHS to court to force them to give me the proof that I need to get the operation as well as compensation for what was done to me. Unfortunately, because of the threat from the British establishment media, I cannot get a lawyer, as the lawyers are worried about their safety, and I therefore have to represent myself in court. On the 18th of March, 2014 I had an appointment with my psychiatrist, Dr. Sri Reddy, at Florence Street Resource Centre. On my way there, because I knew that the NHS were trying to section me and then have me murdered in Levendale, and because of the fact that I had also decided to stop playing games with the NHS since my life is in serious danger from the UK government and establishment, I was worried that the NHS could now use what I intended to say to the NHS as an excuse to section me. I had intended to tell them that I was sectioned in order to cover up what the UK government had done to me, as well as the fact that the NHS had tried to kill me in Gartnavel, and that my memory had recalled what had happened in Gartnavel, including being chemically lobotomized to cover it up. After I got off the bus near Florence Street, I had passed 2 police vans and said via the implant that this was the police threatening the NHS not to section me. Right outside of Florence Street Resource Centre was a white parked car with writing on it. The largest word was Scott. I think that the rest was courtesy car. I then said via the implant that this was the NHS and the Scott Trust telling me that I was going to be sectioned. When I saw my psychiatrist, he informed me that there was a student in with him. I then said via the implant that this student was to witness what I was going to say to my psychiatrist so that they could then section me and have an independent person witness it. I then told my psychiatrist everything that the NHS had done to me in Gartnavel and Levendale hospitals, but I didn't tell my psychiatrist that I had come off my antipsychotic medication, as it knew why the car with Scott and the student were there. During the conversation, my psychiatrist had asked if I felt safe, as I had once again said that there was an assassination order against me. I told him that I feel safe in my home and that the risk to me escalates when I leave my home. I had to be careful not to say anything which would then give the NHS the excuse to section me, despite the fact that I am in fear for my life, since I knew that the NHS's plan was to section me that day and then assassinate me in a mental institution. My psychiatrist then said that the only way that I could get a CT scan was if I agreed to be put into Levendale Hospital. I refused and replied that this would be detrimental to my health. I then asked my psychiatrist if he would countersign my application to see my medical records about the complaints letter. He then asked what was it that I was wanting to see, and I told him the complaints letter and the letter from the complaints manager that accompanied this letter. The psychiatrist then said that it was emails that they had and said that he would be willing to give me a copy of the emails. He had also said that I would have to fill in a different application for the records from the Western Infirmary and the Southern General Hospital. I then thanked him for the emails when the session was over and I wasn't sectioned. The only reason I was not sectioned was what I was saying about the police threatening the NHS not to section me. The psychiatrist Dr. Sri Reddy was also working under a protest like my CPN Stuart Reid, as they were under orders to section me. The proof of this was the car with Scott written on it and the student witness. When I got home, I then examined the series of email printouts. They are dated from the 18/02/2014 at 16:11 until the 20th of February, 2014 at 15:42. This series of email correspondence were from the complaints departments of the NHS and had the names of who had sent them and to whom they were sent to. The names of the staff concerned were Emma Curran, Complaints Manager, Emergency Care and Medical Services, South, Helen Mallory, Callum MacLeod, Linda Scott, Trina Airdrie, Secretary South Sector Mental Health Services, which stated that this email was sent on behalf of Clive Travers. One of the emails also mentioned an Arthur, Paul Kerr. All the emails contained the headers, subject, forward ECMS complaint, Duffy John, importance high. One of the emails dated the 20th of February, 2014 at 15:42 and sent to Trina Airdrie, Paul Kerr, Pavan Srireddy, Clive Travers, and Arthur, stated, Dear all, I have discussed the complaint with Dr. Srireddy and Paul Kerr, NTL. The matter will be discussed further at our MDT clinical meeting tomorrow morning. I have also gained contact with JD and I have arranged to see him at 4 p.m. today to assess his mental state, risk, and intervene as appropriate. We will keep you abreast of any developments. Kind regards, Stuart Reid. One of the emails dated the 20th of February, 2014 at 13:36 said, Hi Stuart, I sent the original email to the wrong Stuart Reid, regards Trina Airdrie. One of the emails dated the 18th of February, 2014 at 16:11 stated that I had an appointment planned for the 25/02/2014 and stated, in view of the attached letter, would it be possible for either of you to see this man sooner? Can you please provide me with some comments regarding the attached and the plan of care for this man? Thanks, regards Trina Airdrie. One of the emails dated the 20th of February, 2014 at 10:56 had my info on its header and for some reason stated, Linda, are you able to confirm if Mr. S is one of our patients? Thanks, Helen. One of the emails dated the 18th of February, 2014 at 16:46 had my info on its header and also for some reason stated, Callum, please see attached letter. I have spoken to Emma and confirmed receipt and told her I would update her tomorrow after I have heard back from you. Can you confirm if Mr. Scott is one of your patients? If so, is he very unwell and we deal with the complaints procedure? If not, I shall log as a complaint through the normal process, Helen. One of the emails dated the 18th of February, 2014 at 16:11 stated, Hi Helen, as discussed, please find attached the complaint I received today from Mr. Duffy and also stated I actioned to our Directorate Ann Harkis, Director of Emergency Care and Medical Services, and we shall not progress until further information is received from yourselves. Very grateful for your assistance advice on how to take forward, kind regards Emma. The email dated the 20th of February, 2014 at 10:56 and the email dated the 18th of February, 2014 at 16:46 contained what can only be described as a code name for me, Mr. Scott and Mr. S. This is also the name of the Guardian's owners, the Scott Trust, who Edward Snowden had leaked the Implant smartphone app to. It was also on the car outside of Florence Street Resource Centre on the 18th of March, 2014. This outrageous codename is an insult to me, as the Scott Trust have tried to assassinate me, smeared me, and along with the BBC had put the smartphone app onto the public domain, thereby psychologically torturing me and publicly humiliating me. This proves that these sick individuals at the NHS have come up with that codename because they are aware and are collaborating with the Scott Trust to murder me and cover up the illegal human experiment in an act of criminal conspiracy. This codename is obviously some kind of sick personal joke amongst the staff at the NHS about a victim who has had his life destroyed by the UK government, the establishment media and the NHS. This is completely unacceptable treatment for a health service and proves categorically that the NHS know about the implant and the smartphone app show. I have these email as evidence. The UK government announced that they were intending to change the law concerning the BBC's licence and that it would no longer be a criminal offence to refuse to pay the licence fee. This was done because I was refusing to pay the licence fee in order that the BBC would be forced to take me to court, and then I would be guaranteed a lawyer in a criminal trial, as I could not get a lawyer to sue the government and the NHS in a civil trial. I have photographic screenshots of an article from the BBC's website from the 8th of March, 2014 confirming this. On the night of the 18th of March, 2014, I received a coincidental email from the Russian security services. Ethan went on to RT News to see if RT were willing to interview me. I then picked up several messages letting me know that Russia would explode my story. I had decided to try and get to RT on the 20th of March, 2014. I had also done a total news blackout so that my illness would not smear Russia, and also so that the UK news media could not use the implant's broadcast to smear Russia. On the 19th of April, 2014, I received the reply from the NHS's complaints manager. The letter was dated 17 March 2014, and stated, "Dear Mr. Duffy, I am writing to your letter of the 17th of February, 2014, which was passed to me on the 18th of February, 2014. Due to the nature of the concerns raised in your letter, we're unable to progress these for investigations under the NHS complaints procedure. I would confirm that I contacted the appropriate services to advise of your concerns, and I understand your CPN has since spoke with you and an appointment was arranged for you to see Dr. P. Sri Reddy, consultant psychiatrist, on the 25th of February, 2014. I am advised that you did not attend this appointment. However, a further appointment has been made for you to attend on the 18th of March, 2014. I am sorry I cannot assist you further with this matter. However, I hope your consultations with your CPN and Dr. Sri Reddy will be of value to you. Yours sincerely, Emma Curran, Complaints Manager." This reply is completely unacceptable to me, as the appointment with my psychiatrist had been prearranged 3 months prior to the appointment on the 25th of February, 2014, and the appointment with my CPN did not arrange the appointment on the 25th of February, 2014, or the appointment on the 18th March 2014. The fact that it took the NHS over 4 weeks to respond to the complaint letter, and that the NHS were meant to acknowledge receipt within 3 days and respond within 21 days, and also in the complaint letter I informed the NHS that I was being psychologically tortured and have an assassination order issued against me, and I have survived assassination attempts, and that I was willing to meet the NHS to mediate this dispute, as well as the fact that the reply arrived the day after my rearranged appointment on the 18th of March, 2014, when the NHS expected me to be sectioned, can only be interpreted as another sick joke and an act of retribution by the NHS because of the fact that I was calling the NHS the weak link in the other side because of all the mistakes that they were making. This was why there was a car with the word Scott on it outside of the resource centre when I went to see my psychiatrist. Also, when I was attempting to contact the NHS to ask about my complaint letter after the expiry of 21-day deadline, I was not just given the runaround, but the NHS had lied to me about the name of the complaints manager at the Western Infirmary. I have audio recordings as well as a transcript of all of these phone calls. This is unacceptable treatment by what is meant to be a health service, especially since the NHS gave a code name for me, Mr. Scott and Mr. S. This meant that I have only one option open to me since the NHS refused the mediation offer, which is to sue the NHS and to ensure that no else is treated in the same way by the NHS in the future. On the 20th of March, 2014, I went to London on a Virgin train. On my way to Central Station in Glasgow at 4:00 am, I passed a foreign-looking citizen who looked at me and then looked down as we walked past each other. I then said via the implant that this was them telling me that I was not under any threat from foreign nationals, since the establishment news media were using foreign nationals in death threats against me. The following day, the 21st of March, 2014, I had said I was going to go to ASDA later to print some photographic evidence. Later that day when I left, a car containing a female foreign-looking national passed me. She had a mobile phone in her hand and then she touched her ear. This was British citizens with ethnic backgrounds acknowledging to me that I had picked up their message correctly. While travelling south on the train on the 20th of March, 2014 a passenger showed me a headline from a newspaper that stated traitors. He then started to do a crossword puzzle. Later on, during the journey on the train, what I thought was the police doing another psychological attack on my minders, they had showed me a paper with the headline Woodstock and Stewart, which was a reference to the solicitor's Irwin Mitchell code using Joni Mitchell's tune Woodstock, which I was always listening to, and I was also trying to get the law firm Irwin Mitchell to represent me. I then started to threaten the Met, as I had thought at the time that this was an attempt to stop me from suing the police chief. I then arrived at Millbank Towers, where RT's headquarters in London is located, and spoke to our receptionist. She then phoned RT's office and gave the phone to me. I then spoke to a secretary with an Eastern European accent. She said I would have to send an email with my contact details. I then asked her if I could not get an interview, and she replied that for a story like this I would have to get sent an email appointment. I have photographic evidence of sending RT an email from the day before I went down to London. On the train back north, I then analysed what had happened that day, as the man doing the puzzle was the security services telling me to figure out what it was that they were saying, and the document headed with Woodstock and Stewart was the security services saying they are still working under a protest like my CPN, Stuart Reid, and that I should sue the government. I really said that the Conservative government had sold me and the implant technology to Russia with the price that I would be assassinated, since the UK government could not get anyone else to kill me. I then realised that the security services had prevented me from going up to RT's office. Also, what I thought was the police trying to cover up this story was instead the security services warning me about what the Conservative government had done, as I had overheard the security services speaking on the train on my way back north. They were saying that they had met their foreign counterparts on the orders of the UK government. The Conservative government, David Cameron, Theresa May, and William Hague, had committed the crime of treason to add to all of their other crimes in an attempt to cover up this story. Back in Glasgow, I then went up to the city centre in Glasgow to buy a photographic printer. When I was heading for something to eat, I picked up a message from someone who, when he was approaching me, pulled out his wallet, which had a large Union Jack on it. This was a message from the UDA that both sides in the north of Ireland were also trying to keep me alive. On my way back home, I picked up a message from a female soldier. This was the military saying that they were also supporting me. Because I was trying to repair my mind as much as I could with my mind public, I had therefore done another total news blackout so that the news media could not smear me. The people of Glasgow had then warned me in code to check out the news media. I then watched the BBC and Sky News channels and discovered that behind my back the media were trying to get anyone they could to murder me. Since I was now watching the news again, the media continued to issue death threats against me. On the morning of the 4th of April, 2014, the BBC had issued a coded death threat against my family. They had showed a horse's head, a letter being delivered, and 3 pictures of children above a bed. This was the BBC threatening to murder my nieces, one of whom is still a child. The BBC know that my nieces are aware of the show, as the whole world had heard my niece speaking in code to me. She had also commented on the Police Scotland Chief Constable Stephen House by using the statement haunted house. This was my niece saying that she is being tortured by that police chief, as all 3 of my nieces are aware of the death threats that have been issued against them, as well as the death threats to their uncle. The fact that the BBC know that my nieces are aware of what is happening and that the BBC still threatened to kill them shows that the BBC are abusing my nieces, one of whom is a child. Since the BBC had also covered up Jimmy Savile and Cyril Smith, this is yet more insidious behaviour by the BBC. The Western media were also attempting to blame Russia for killing me in coincidental news stories on their news channels. I had given Russia the code number 10, and the media were trying tointly using this code number that Russia was offering money to assassinate me so that the Western media could murder me and get away with it. I was then exposing this tactic to the world via the Implant. I had also intended to go to the Court of Session to use the Protection from Abuse, Scotland, Act 2001 to stop the news media from psychologically torturing and threatening to murder me and my family. While in ASDA the people of Glasgow let me know in code that they know that this is not a game but that is deadly serious, and on my way home they had used Glasgow's code for angry, which is vehicles revving their engines loudly to let me know that Glasgow is raging at the Western media and the UK government for what they are doing to me and my family. On the 6th of April, 2014 at around about 9:20 p.m. the UK government had sent another death threat in the form of a targeted animated advert on a website, the Free Dictionary http://legaldictionary.thefreedictionary.com prayer, that I was on. The advert contained the text RIP Fatman and but try not to mourn. I have taken a screenshot of this death threat. The UK security services then sent another targeted advert to me while I was on Planet Rock's website. This advert was a blank black advert, black is my surname in Irish Gaelic, and contained a link to the website http://www.euronlinecoix.com/UK. This website contains info about targeted adverts on the internet. This was GCHQ advising me that I would have to prove in court how the Conservative government was sending all of the online death threats to me, as the security services are still working under a protest. I have also taken a photographic screenshot of GCHQ's advert message. On the morning of the 7th of April, 2014 I was again exposing via the Implant what the Western media were trying to do concerning blaming Russia, and I had said via the Implant that I was going to RT to see what Russia had made of this. On RT News the Russian security services let me know that they were aware of the Western media's tactic to blame Russia for the Western media assassinating me by using the code for angry, which was riot, which is what the police officers were using to let me know that they were angry, with riot vans, since the police officers are also working under a protest because their boss. This can only be interpreted as a veiled threat by the NHS to me in an attempt to force me to not include the staff at the NHS in my summons. The NHS had either taken a patient to a normal hospital or they had sectioned a patient in order to threaten me. My CPN had made a new appointment on the 15th of April 2014 at 11 o'clock. On the 17th of April, 2014 the British establishment media via the Daily Record and The Sun once again tried to have me murdered. The Daily Record used a headline on page 2 which said 10 years for rapist who found victims in church, page 11 foot. The number 11 is also one of my code numbers for myself. On the same page the Daily Record, editors Alan Rennie and Murray Foote and the journalist Tom McTague tried to get me murdered using a headline containing the text "and your date with death is," and a headline underneath which said "Condem plan to stop people blowing their retirement savings." This article contained the codes 82.9, which means hate yes police. ACI was telling the media that I intended to go to the police after my court case to press charges against the news media, and 10.3, which means Russia trust, and 72.6, which means John Duffy yes Glasgow. This was the British establishment using Russia and Glasgow to threaten me, and 86.6, which means hate Glasgow yes. 26 means Glasgow yes as the number. 2 is code for yes, as the media were trying to turn Russia and Glasgow against me, and 8.1, which means great NO, and 78.5, which means John Duffy great money. This was the British establishment media via the Daily Record offering great money to anyone who would murder me on behalf of the establishment news media and the UK government. The article also contained the text 65 birthday, which means Glasgow money yes, B equals 2, and the text 75% of baby boys and 85% of baby girls will see 65. This says John Duffy money, 7.5, great money, 8.5, and Glasgow money, 6.5. The media smeared me as a paedophile and were then hoping that Glasgow would murder me in return for payment by the Daily Record, owned by Trinity Mirror. There was another article on the same page which said in code 6.7% and 1.7% in February and 1.6% in March. This was the Daily Record saying Glasgow John Duffy, 6.7, and John Duffy, 0.7, yes, February is the second month and 2 means yes, and GLSGOW, 0.6, trust, March is the third month and 3 means trust. All of these codes on page 2 were meant to persuade everyone to assassinate me, as the British establishment news media, including the BBC, are involved in a criminal conspiracy to have me murdered to cover up what the Labour and Conservative governments, the news media and the NHS had done to me. I have photographic evidence of all of these death attempts and smears. The Sun, editor Gordon Smart and the journalists Emily Ashton and Chris Musson, also on the 17/04/2014 issued death threats against me. There was a gravestone with the code numbers 82, hate yes, 72, John Duffy yes, 86, hate Glasgow, 78, John Duffy hate. In the accompanying article there were also codes which were meant to convince everyone that the Sun would pay money to have me murdered. I have photographic evidence of all of these death threat attempts. There was also on the same page of The Sun, page 2 from the 17th of April, 2014, an article which told the newspaper's readers who was behind this assassination attempt. It said the council, police, the health board, and others. This was saying that all of the people and organisations that I am taking to court, the UK government, the NHS, the BBC, the Police Scotland Chief Constable Stephen House and the Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland, as well as who I am reporting to the police, the Daily Record, the Sun and the Guardian, if I win my court case in Edinburgh and make it to Ireland for the operation and then manage to make it back to Glasgow and then go to the police with the proof of the operation, so that the police can then ignore the illegal orders from their chief constable and investigate all of these crimes, since I had already said that that was my plan to get around the criminal cover-up. I have proof of this article. On the 18th of April, 2014, I had found out what the Defence Minister, Philip Hammond, had said on the 15/04/2014 in a statement. He had said that Scotland faced threats from space. On the morning of the 19th of April, 2014 at around about 6 a.m. I checked to see if my local shop was open. I then noticed what was in the sky. The UK government had ordered a chemtrail attack on the city of Glasgow. This was because my city is trying to keep me alive. The Defence Minister's statement of the 18/04/2014 was the Conservative government threatening to attack Scotland from the skies. I have video evidence of this chemtrail attack and evidence of the Defence Minister's statement. Also on the 19th of April, 2014, the Daily Record, editors Alan Rennie and Murray Foote, and the Police Scotland Chief Constable, Stephen House, in an article in that paper using a story from St Andrews, were threatening to have my niece raped. My niece is studying at the establishment's St Andrews University. In an article next to the rape attempt story was a headline written by the journalist Jamie Beatson which stated "Celebrity Big Bros invite to murderer." The article was printed on page 27, which is also my code for Yes John Duffy. I am the most famous person on planet Earth because of the smartphone app show, what can only be described as a reality show, and also a reference to George Orwell's Big Brother from the book 1984. The Daily Record and their editor-and journalist had invited anyone to rape and murder my niece because I, despite all of the death attempts by the media from the 15th and 17th of April, was still intending to go to the Court of Session in Edinburgh. On the 20th of April, 2014, which was Easter Sunday, the Sunday Mail, editors Alan Rennie and Jim Wilson and the journalist Stuart MacDonald used an article in that paper with the headline "Blazekiller's £1 million court bill" and contain within the article the text "firebombed" and legal costs and the sum of £1 million and the name Scott Snowden. This is the Sunday Mail's editors and theirist of the establishment news media, including The Guardian, the Scott Trust, and the BBC and Trinity Mirror, the Sunday Mail's owners, offering money to have my home torched. Since the Daily Record, the Sunday Mail's sister paper, had insidiously smeared me as a fire starter, this can only be interpreted as a sick and criminal act of conspiracy to murder me. I have photographic evidence from this newspaper. The United Kingdom government have illegally placed electronic surveillance equipment into my home and embedded a medical implant into the parietal lobe of my brain. I have been under constant surveillance for 8 years and have been forced to live under virtual house arrest and virtual solitary confinement because of the surveillance equipment in my home and the medical implant in me brain. On the 22nd of April, 2014 at 1 hour 3 minutes and 11 seconds I received a text on my Irish mobile phone. The text said to phone the number 0024 710 1123. This was a message from the UK Security Services, as the international code for 247 is Ascension Island, a part of the British Overseas Territory of St Helena, Ascension and Tristan da Cunha. It was also a coded message, as the numbers 247 mean yes, 2, no cover-up, 4, John Duffy, 7, the following numbers, 1011, is a binary number, and the last two numbers mean yes, 2, trust, 3. There was a binary number message in the film Invasion Day, which was binary 10,110, which is 22 in decimal. In code 22 does not mean yes yes, but is meant to be added up to get the number 4, which in code means Ireland, as the code number 4 has three meanings. Media Ireland no cover UP. The binary number, 1011, in decimal is 11, which is one of my code numbers for myself. This coded message was the UK Security Services telling me to blow a whistle on what the UK government, the NHS, the news media, the Police Scotland Chief Constable and the Lord Advocate were doing to me. The film Invasion Day was another film that was aimed at me by the security services. I also have photographic evidence of the binary number-coded message from the film Invasion Day. I cannot get a lawyer because the lawyers are worried that if they help me they will be assassinated, therefore I have to represent myself. I cannot listen to any radio station on earth without being smeared, as the radio stations are in fear for their lives if they do not force me to stop listening by smearing me. I cannot live without listening to music played constantly, as my mind is public to the whole of the planet via the Implant and smartphone app. I have by all standards been exiled from my life as a human being because the Western establishment have issued an assassination order against me and anyone who helps me. The NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde have, in collaboration with the UK government, embedded a medical implant into the parietal lobe of my brain. The NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, Emma Curran and Helen Mallory, were involved in the criminal conspiracy to cause the criminal cover-up of the crimes committed against me, and also of the direct act of omission of denying me the life-saving emergency CT scan and operation. The NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, Andrew Robertson OBE, Dr. John Taylor and Dr. Mike Taylor were involved in the criminal conspiracy to cause the psychological torture of me and of the attempted murder of me in order to cover up the crimes committed against me, and also of the direct act of omission of denying me the life-saving emergency CT scan and operation. The UK government, David Cameron MP, Theresa May MP and William Hague MP were involved in the criminal conspiracy to cause the physical and psychological torture of me and of the attempted murder of me in order to cover up the crimes committed against me. Police Scotland and the Police Scotland Chief Constable Stephen House were involved in the criminal conspiracy to cause the psychological torture of me and of the attempted murder of me, and of covering up the crimes committed against me, and of conspiring to have my nieces raped and murdered. The Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and the Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland were involved in the criminal conspiracy to cause the cover-up of the crimes committed against me. The BBC, Lord Christopher Patten and Anthony Hall were involved in the criminal conspiracy to cause the psychological torture of me and of the attempted murder of me, and to cover up the crimes committed against me, and of conspiring to have my nieces murdered. I intend to use the Form 43-2B recovery of forms to get the names of additional defenders. I cannot get the name of the manager at the Southern General Hospital who had ordered the staff at that institution on the 11th of February, 2014 to refuse me the life-saving emergency CT scan and operation as part of the criminal conspiracy to cover up the crimes committed against me. On the 22nd of April, 2014 I handed in my summons to the clerks at the public counter in the Court of Session. I received a reply the following day asking me what steps I had taken to obtain a signature of counsel or agent in writing. That day I then handed in a letter in person to the court containing a statement and evidence of the steps I had taken to try and get counsel and an agent. I received a letter from the Court of Session dated the 28th of April, 2014. This was the reply from the Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre. This letter stated that after due consideration his lordship refused me leave veto proceed without a duly authorized signature in terms of Rule of Court 4.2.5. His reason for refusal were I am not willing to grant the application. The summons consists of an extremely long narrative of fantastical, delusional and wholly unsupported allegations against a large number of public authorities and their representatives. His lordship's decision is final and not subject to review to this or any other court. Accordingly, your papers are returned. Since my mind is public to the whole of the planet because of the Implant smartphone app, which the staff at the Court of Session have access to. The proof of this is that I have already picked up several messages from them when I was at the Court of Session, as well as the fact that the Lord Ordinary's statement about wholly unsupported allegations is an intentional lie, as I have amassed an enormous amount of evidence about what was done to me which can only be used in a court of law. As the media are covering up these crimes and the Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre is attempting to prevent me from my legal right to attend the court to have my evidence judged by the Court of Session and the people of Scotland. The response from the Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre can only be interpreted as an attempt to criminally conspire with the UK government to cover up the crimes committed against me, as the Lord Ordinary cannot claim to be the only person upon this planet who has not heard of the Implant and the smartphone app, as well as the right of a Scotsman to attend a court of law to have his life and his human rights defended by the Lord Ordinaries and the people of his country in a jury trial. This is completely unacceptable behaviour from a Lord Ordinary at the Court of Session, which has been defending the rights of the people of Scotland for over 400 years. The Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre is now guilty of conspiracy to murder me, conspiracy to rape and murder my nieces, conspiracy to commit treason and conspiracy to cover up the criminal acts of the UK government, the NHS, the UK news media including the BBC, the Police Scotland Chief Constable Stephen House and the Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland. I now intend to go back to the Court of Session to hand in a criminal complaint against the traitor Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre with the proof of what was done to me by all of his co-conspirators. This includes proof of the UK government committing treason by giving proof that the entire Conservative UK government, including the Prime Minister David Cameron, have been found to betterant to the Queen's enemies in her realm, giving to them aid and comfort in the realm, or elsewhere, by conspiring to sell secret state UK technology to a foreign power with the price that I was to be assassinated in violation of the UK Treason Act of 1351 and 1708. In April 2014, the NHS had started to inject an antipsychotic polypharmacy into the eggs from the shop across from my home, as I had started to eat several eggs a day. I then developed an itch on my shin, an itch which I had not experienced since I was being forced medicated with the antipsychotic polypharmacy of flufenazine and olanzapine. While on this forced polypharmacy, the itch was so bad I had to go to my GP for an ointment. When Ethan started to boil the eggs, about half of the eggs contained a microscopic hole which only showed up during the boiling of the eggs as the egg white was leaking out. 3 of the 6 eggs had holes in every packet that I had bought. I then realized what was happening because of the itch that I had developed again. The NHS were once again attempting to assassinate me, as there would have eventually been a lethal dose. They had to do this as I had stopped taking the antipsychotics that they were forcing me to take, and because of the smartphone app broadcast the NHS knew that I was not taking any medication. I was throwing out the medication that I was collecting from the pharmacy. In April, Peaches Geldof had died suddenly. It was announced by the inquest that she had died of a heroin overdose. The establishment news media had Peaches intentionally poisoned in an attempt to get me to stop using propaganda music against them, her father is a musician. Peach is also a Scottish saying which I had kept on using. At the end of April, I had handed in a summons to the Court of Session in Edinburgh because I could not get a lawyer or an advocate. I had to get a Lord Ordinary to allow me to sign the summons, as I was forced to become a party litigant. I then received the reply from the Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre. Despite the fact that everyone in Scotland knows about their Implant and the smartphone app, including the Court of Session, as when I was in Edinburgh the clerks at the court were speaking in code to me, the Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre refused me the legal right to attend the outer house of the Court of Session. The Lord Ordinary had committed the criminal act of conspiracy to cover up the crimes committed against me. I had then decided to go to Ireland to see if I could get the operation and then return to Scotland with the proof which would allow the police to ignore the criminal orders from their Chief Constable Stephen House and investigate the crimes committed against me. I then decided to expose some of the things, via the Implant smartphone app, which it knew that the UK media were covering up, including the documentary Unlawful Killing. This documentary was made by Keith Allen and was banned in the United Kingdom. The whole of the United Kingdom who had access to the smartphone app had heard this broadcast, as I had previously announced when I was coming back from Edinburgh that I would broadcast it. On the 4th of May, 2014, I had announced to the government and the establishment media that I would go to Ireland and come back and force them into Barliney prison, and I had then played a tune, Who Knows Where Has the Time Goes by Fairport Convention, which contains the lyrics Tell Them to Go. I played this tune for 1 hour twice a day at 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. During the broadcast of this tune, I constantly told the government and the news media to leave Britain before I came back from Ireland. I was also telling the people of the UK to spoil their ballot papers on the 22nd of May, 2014 during the Euro elections to send a message to the UK government and establishment media. On the 8th of May, 2014, the Daily Mail, owned by Jonathan Harmsworth and edited by Paul Dacre, had issued threats against my family and myself. They had also showed a computer chair with the poison symbol on it, the skull and bones. On the 9th of May, 2014, the Daily Mail had issued coincidental smears against me. They also had a story about the singer Lily Allen, who had been hospitalized by a mysterious illness and had a headline that she had been poisoned. There was also a story by the Defense Secretary Philip Hammond stating that women go into battle. Lily Allen was poisoned with a bug that brings on food poisoning. This was done as a direct response to me broadcasting her father's documentary Unlawful Killing, and was also inspired by the fact that I was constantly smearing the NHS for poisoning the eggs that he had bought. The Guardian on the 16th of May, 2014 on their website published an article using a coincidental story about child protection containing code numbers to smear me as a paedophile. The codes were the numbers representing letters of the alphabet in text that was highlighted as they were links, as well as code numbers including 37, 3 equals trust, 7 equals John Duffy. They were also using companies to identify myself as the target, G4S meaning G equals 7 equals John Duffy, 4 equals no cover UP, S equals 19 equals no police, as well as ATOS, as everyone knows that I'm on disability benefits. They also used another article from the same day to also insinuate the same smears using the word asylum to target me, as everyone also knows that I was illegally incarcerated in a mental asylum. They were trying to imply that the police had covered up the crime. On the 17th of May, 2014, the Daily Express website, owned by Richard Desmond, used a coincidental news article containing code numbers to issue a death threat against me. The article was offering money to have me assassinated. The article had the text booked 356 beds. This is translated as yes, B equals 2, trust, 3, money, 5, Glasgow, 6, dead. Beds is also code for dead. There was also a story to the right of the main article which was about Princess Diana. This was referring to my broadcasting of the documentary Unlawful Killing. It also had highlighted text Home Office, Service, Costs. This is the Daily Express also referring to the assassination attempt 3 days later on the 20th of May, 2014. The Home Office is the government, services code for the security services in Ireland, S equals 19, as. That was how the Irish security services had identified themselves to me when I was in Ireland, which was being implied as the security services in the UK, as my code for the security services can by the 15, 16 or 19, and cost is trust, 3. The UK security services were ordered to shoot me when I was asleep on the 20/05/2014, but they refused to follow these orders. The reason for the offering of money to have me killed was in case the security services did not carry out the assassination, as the media are aware that the security services are trying to keep me alive and are working under a protest. The government and SKY, CEO Jeremy Darroch, had once again broadcast my home on a channel on Sky. On the morning of the 19th of May, 2014, on my way home from ASDA, my city warned me in code that the Sky TV broadcast had been cut. On my way to my sister's home, the Police Scotland Chief Constable Stephen House ordered the police to drive past me with two unmarked police cars. One of the cars was not in normal police colours but had police written on the side. The other was the unmarked police car that the chief was ordering the police to use to drive past my home on numerous occasions. It has a distinctive loud engine. When I was in my sister's home, my niece brought up the subject of Game of Thrones and also said it was all about murder, which was to be expected. She was warning Methat because of the SKY broadcast being cut that I might be assassinated, as I was always referring to the book Game of Thrones in my propaganda campaign against the UK government and establishment media. On the 19th of May, 2014, I received another death threat to my nieces, this time by the bosses at BT. BT's chairman Sir Michael Rake and chief executive Gavin Patterson, who both went to Cambridge University, sent the death threat via email. Cambridge and Oxford universities as well as the Western establishment are involved in trying to murder me because of the amount of their ex-students who are in positions of power, including most of the UK government, the BBC, and the police force's chief constables in England. Most of whom I'm trying to put in prison for putting the implant in me, constantly trying to assassinate me and psychologically torturing me and my family. On the morning of the 20th of May, 2014, I woke up and as usual I turned my computer on to play music. One of my speakers was not working. Both of my speakers are not old and the one that does not now work contained a clicker that the security services were using to communicate with me. I had already said publicly that there was one there. The security services damaged that speaker to send me another message. The message was that the UK government, David Cameron and Theresa May, had ordered the security services to assassinate me while I was asleep. The UK government had this done on the 20th of May, 2014 because it was 2 days before the European elections and I was trying to convince the people of the UK to spoil their ballot papers in my propaganda campaign, in which I was saying via the implant and also with a 57-minute psychological ops video that I had made and kept playing twice a day at 11 Armand 7 p.m. I had also posted the video onto the internet on my website way.celticafilms.com and also onto YouTube. The media were using a tune, The Ballad of Ned Kelly by Fotheringay, that I was listening to, which contained the number 10,000, the Daily Mirror on the 17th of May, 2014, to issue a death threat against me. It also contained the lyrics, 1885 is a year I remember so well, but they drove old Brad into an early grave and sent my mother to jail, taken by the government, well I'd rather die 10,000 times than hang from a gallows tree, oh that I didn't wanna kill Kennedy and you get no peace of mind. The number 1885 can be translated with my code to mean not, 1, great, 8, hate, 8, empty Errigal, 5. Mount Errigal, and the number 5 became my code for the hospital in Dublin where I was going for the operation after being refused the legal right to go to the Court of Session by the Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre, who was also criminally conspiring with the UK government. The lyrics "but they drove old Brad into an early grave and sent my mother to jail" was a reference to the fact that I was to be assassinated and was also a reference to an article in the Daily Record. The story in the Daily Record that morning, the 20th of May, 2014, used a coincidental story in their paper. The story had the headline "The Costa Killer 15. This can be translated in code as D, T equals 20 which is 2 which is yes, Costa, C equals 3 which is trust, killer is what it says and is also John Duffy, as K equals 11 which is also one of my codes for myself, and 15 is one of my codes for the security services. The 15 in the article was also a reference to the lyrics "sent my mother to jail" as the government and the establishment were wanting revenge against the security services for trying to keep me alive. The lyrics "peace of mind" was also another saying that I kept using, as that was what I was trying to achieve by having the implant removed. The lyrics "oh, that I didn't wanna kill Kennedy" were from a story by the Daily Mail, owned by Jonathan Harmsworth, on the 17/05/2014, in which he had issued death threats to me in a story about Marilyn Monroe which also referenced Kennedy. This was the Western establishment media including SKY, the Daily Mirror, the Daily Express, the Guardian, the Daily Record and the Daily Mail criminally conspiring with the UK government to murder me again, as the assassination attempt on the morning of the 20/05/2014 was pre-planned days before the attempt. While writing this statement, I was listening to Fotheringer's album. During the tune The Banks of the Nile, track number 9 on the album, the security services used a clicker at the lyrics bullets. This was them telling me how I was to be assassinated, as the last time the UK government tried to murder me they had used poison, but I then was also administered an antidote. That tune also contains the lyrics the government has ordered, "Oh, but I'll cut off my yellow hair. In the sultry suns of Egypt your rosy cheeks would spoil, and where the cannons they do rattle, when the bullets they do fly." This was the UK government and establishment once again using the lyrics from music to tell everyone who done it, the government has ordered. The lyrics "Oh, but I'll cut off my yellow hair" is a reference to the fact that I had shaved my head to show the scar from their illegal operation, and yellow is also one of my codes for my city. It is from Donovan's tune Colors. The lyrics are "Yellow is the color of my true love's hair." The lyrics "In the sultry suns of Egypt your rosy cheeks would spoil" is a reference to the fact that I kept on saying that I was only going to target the tops of the pyramid, and rosy cheeks is also a reference to the whistleblowing films Red 1 and Red 2. The track number of the tune, which was 9, is Alchemy code for the police who I was saying that I was going to go to once I had the operation in Ireland, so that I would have the proof to allow the police to investigate all of these crimes, as their chief constable, Stephen House, was criminally conspiring to cover up these crimes. The 2 unmarked police cars from the night before was supposed to be the last time that House had ordered the police to drive past me, as he thought that I was supposed to be assassinated the following morning. On the morning of the 20th of May, 2014, I had said that after the latest assassination attempt by the UK government that no one can now tell me not to go to the police after I come back from Ireland. On my way back from ASDA, a van with writing on its side passed me. The writing said "Shots Healthy Living." This was my city telling me to go to the police to bring down the government and the establishment media, as Shots is a Scottish prison. On the 27th of May, 2014, the Evening Times editor Anthony Carlin published an article threatening to murder my nieces. The headline on the front page contained the number 10, which, because of the assassination attempt of the 20th of May, 2014, I had previously announced that the number 10 was now code for assassinate, followed by kids. This was done in an attempt to prevent me from seeking justice for what was done to me by forcing me to remain silent and to cover up what was done to me and thereby be broadcast and tortured for the rest of my life, with the UK government and media constantly trying to assassinate me. On the 29th of May, 2014, I received a card from the post office stating that there was a registered letter for me and I was to collect it. I had not heard the door as I was playing my psychological operations video. When I collected it the following day, the letter was from the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. The letter was the exact same letter that the COPFS had sent me in April, with the same "thatty" on it, the 23rd of April, 2014, with a note stating photo and disc returned. This was an attempt by the Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland to prevent me from going back to the Court of Session to hand in a letter of criminal complaint against the Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre, which, because of the Implant smartphone app, the Lord Advocate had heard me saying that I was going to do this, as I had also found out that by doing so I could hand in my evidence that the Lord Ordinary had illegally prevented me from doing in a civil trial. The Lord Advocate was saying that the same thing would happen again, meaning that the Lord Advocate would criminally conspire with the UK government to cover up these crimes, by preventing the procurators at the COPFS from investigating these crimes, including the latest assassination attempt from the 20th of May, 2014. I now have to go back to Ireland to try and get the operation to remove the implant, with the knowledge that the UK government and media will try to assassinate me in an attempt to cover up all of these crimes. As while watching the European elections on the night of the 22/05/2014, William Hague MP came on to the BBC and issued another death threat against me. He had said free hit meaning trust, free equals 3 equals trust, and hit means assassinate. I have booked the hotels and coach for going to Ireland on the 25th of June, 2014, and I intend to return on the 4th of July, 2014. On the 4th of May, 2014, the Daily Record once again tried to have my nieces murdered with two articles right next to each other on page 2. The first said shops targeted in Kids Health Drive, and the second was students hail top unis teaching, which was about St Andrews University where one of my nieces is studying. On the 7th of June, 2014, I had intended to buy some Scotch pies from ASDA. Outside of ASDA was a police van. When in there, I had bought the pies. At the area where the pies were contained, 3 members of the ASDA staff were waiting with trolleys to remove the pies once he had left, and they were also ordered to laugh. I had also noted that at the ASDA bakery all off the best before dates on the bread were for the following day, the 8th of June, 2014. When I arrived back home, I then cooked one of the pies, but before I had eaten it, I had decided to look at the ingredients of the pies. There was a smear word in amongst the ingredients. The smear word was rape. I have photographic evidence of the ingredients and have 3 frozen pies in my freezer. I know that the pies contain poison and antipsychotics, but I have to get the police in Scotland to analyse them, but because their chief constable is collaborating with the UK government including in this attempt, the proof of which is the police van outside of ASDA, I therefore have difficulty in doing this just now until the police chief Stephen House has been arrested for constantly trying to murder me. This was the news media, ASDA, and Stephen House collaborating to murder me, as it was also designed to get me to re-watch an expose documentary that I had broadcast, since the news media knew that I had already been poisoned in a London hotel and had smeared them for 14 hours while I thought that I was dying. The media knew that I would have checked the ingredients once I had realized that I had been poisoned and were relying on me then rebroadcasting the documentary. The documentary contained coincidental numbers which were also code numbers and a reference to one of the tunes that I had kept playing, which was The Wait. This documentary and tune contained references to the police chief Stephen House, who I had always referred to as the poodle, and the tune contained the lyrics "If you take my dog." The tune also referred to karma, which I have always gone on about. The tune also mentioned the NHS. This was the news media turning Stephen House and their NHS and ASDA CEO Andy Clark into Lee Harvey Oswald. As this was also referenced in both the documentary and my PSY Ops music. The news media were getting desperate in trying to murder me and get away with it, as I was still trying to bring them down, and they therefore wanted to hand Stephen House over to the police, as he has shamed the police, and the media knew this because of the amount of riot vans that I kept on seeing when I was out, as the riot van was the police's code for them being angry. I then went back to Ireland on the 25th of June, 2014. On the coach to Donegal, the Foreign Secretary had sent 2 MI6 agents onto the bus. One of them showed me an iPad that Hugh was playing solitaire on. This was a reference to the government and news media's game. Ethan said via the Implant that I would defend myself if I had to. While passing through Ballyclare, I received a message from an Irish citizen telling me to smoke him if I was forced to, as everyone wants me to get the operation. In my hotel in Letterkenny, I found out that the Irish security services were watching out for me while I was in Ireland, the same as in 2013. I was in Donegal for 1 day, then I went to Dublin on the bus. When I arrived in Dublin, I smoked a cigarette outside of the bus station. I then received a message from the Russian security services, FSB, that they were not interested in assassinating me. Ireland 2014. Friday the 27th of June. St James Hospital. I went to St James Hospital to get the CT scan, which would prove that the medical implant was embedded into the parietal lobe of my brain, but the management staff had denied me the CT scan. The nurses had then worked under a protest and spoke in code and tapped table using code numbers, saying that the Irish hospitals were like the Glasgow NHS, meaning that I was being denied medical treatment. There was also a coincidental sign in the waiting area that had the text "cover up." I then seen a consultant GP who denied me the CT scan and then advised me to go to Mater Hospital or the Beaumont Hospital. Mater Hospital. That afternoon I then went to the Mater Hospital. At the reception when I arrived and spoke to the receptionist, she was interrupted by a phone call and then she wrote the letter T onto a piece of paper. The letter T was a reference to the tune When the Wild Wind Blows by Iron Maiden, which contains the lyrics sipped their tea and left waiting. This was the management confirming that they were collaborating with the UK government, the UK news media and the UK NHS to cover up the crimes committed against me. I was then registered with the hospital as I also had the European Health Insurance card and was told to wait to see a consultant. I was forced to wait for 3 hours without seeing a consultant, as the tune When the Wild Wind Blows confirmed would have happened, despite the fact that patients who had arrived after were taken in and were seen by a consultant. The management were also laughing at me and were lying to the patients and were telling the patients and low-down staff to speak tome in code. The patients were told to walk by me and rub their stomach, meaning children. A manager was walking around the A&E with the Irish Mirror newspaper, which had a story about a child being shot. The paper also had a story about Jimmy Savile, which contained codes that were meant to smear me as a paedophile. At the end, after waiting for 3 hours, I said via the implant that I was getting ready to leave the hospital. The management then told a patient to ask me for a cigarette and say thanks a million, which means in code yes no million, which was a reference to me trying to sue the UK government and the UK NHS and the BBC for £1 million compensation and then being illegally denied the right to attend the court by the Lord Ordinary Colin J. Tyre. Sunday, the 29th of June. I had decided to try St. Vincent's Hospital. I had went to a chip shop to have my dinner. On the way back to the hotel, on the same street as the chip shop, I passed a nurse wearing uniform that had St. Vincent's Hospital written on it. Monday, the 30th of June. St. Vincent's Hospital. I went to St. Vincent's Hospital and asked a manager where was the A&E. She said it was a mental health hospital and told me to go to St. Louise's ward. Louise is the name of one of my nieces, who the UK government and establishment media as well as the Police Scotland Chief Constable had threatened to rape and murder. I went there and asked for directions to an A&E hospital and the receptionist confirmed that St. Vincent's was a psychiatric hospital. I then decided to go to Beaumont Hospital. Beaumont Hospital. Outside of Beaumont Hospital, I was saying via the implant that the staff had better give me the CT scan, and I was also aware that this was a sting, and I was wondering how high the cover-up went and said that I was going to record the conversation with the staff via my voice recorder on my mobile phone. I was registered at the reception and told to wait. While I was sitting in the waiting area, a manger came out of a room and touched her ear as she walked past me. This was the management saying that they had heard me talking via the implant. I was assessed by a nurse at 10:21 and was then told to wait to see a consultant. I have recorded this conversation. I saw the consultant at 10:46 for around about 20 minutes and have also recorded this conversation. I told the consultant what the UK government and NHS had done to me. I had showed him the scar on the back of my head and also the picture of the scar. He then tried to deny that this was a scar. Even the NHS in the UK have admitted that it is a scar despite the fact that they are denying me medical treatment in an attempt to cover up the operation as it is ablatant scar. I had asked for the CT scan but was denied this by the consultant. He asked if I was seeing a psychiatrist and I told him I was and that my psychiatrist and my CPN were working under a protest. He then replied that there was a lot of that going on. I also told him that the UK government and the NHS had tried to assassinate me. He then said the UK government and the media, sorry, who was trying to kill you? I had not mentioned the fact that the media were trying to kill me. He also said that he was sending a psychiatrist to see me and that I should be put back on antipsychotics. He then took a blood sample from me. That night I then developed a large bruise from the blood sample, as I always do when I have a needle put in me. This also happened when I was poisoned in a London hotel on the orders of the UK government and also when I was administered an antidote back in Scotland. He then told me to sit and wait for the psychiatrist. He placed a chair under a sign that had the words in a crisis, "Don't lose your head." I then waited for the psychiatrist and said via the implant that I was only going to wait for 10 minutes. Then said actually it is about 13 minutes. I then said that this was an attempt by the management at the Irish hospitals to section me and then assassinate me, as I would have been placed on antipsychotics that have side effects, one of which is that it causes sudden unexplained death. The Irish Health Service would have then given me a lethal dose to murder me in collaboration with the UK Health Service, the UK news media and the UK government. I then left the hospital and went back to the hotel. I then listened to the recordings that I had made. At 12 minutes and 56 seconds, a consultant in the next area started to sing "You're Here for All." This means in code yes, hospital, great, Glasgow, NO. This is a reference to the fact that I kept on saying to the UK government and the UK NHS and the UK news media that they would never kill me in Glasgow. During the recording of the consultant at 13 minutes and 30 seconds, a consultant in the next area started to sing 50 days ago. The jingle is. This means in code hospital, 5, cover UP, 4, 1, yes, 2, assassinate, J is 10, security, I is 9 when in Ireland. This was the management confirming that the Irish hospitals would murder me when they illegally sectioned me, as the 3 hospitals were collaborating with the UK NHS, the UK government and the UK establishment media. As in the Irish Daily Mail, there was a front page story that was continued on page 4 that had code numbers and words in it, which were stating that I was to be assassinated. The words were hit, which means kill, and the code numbers in text 7 to 10 years old. Which means in code John Duffy, 7, yes, T is 20 is equal to 2, assassinate, 10, yes hospital, Y is 25 is equal to 2, 5, security, O equals 15. The UK establishment news media have been offering money to have me assassinated, but no one has taken the blood money until the private Irish hospitals took the money, as they have website pages to accept donations. Lord Rothermere, Daily Mail owner, the owners of the Mirror, Trinity Mirror, The Guardian, The Scott Trust, and The Sun, News International, have offered to give large donations to the Irish hospitals if they murdered me on their behalf, in an attempt to cover up what the UK government and the UK news media had done to me, and to stop me from exposing and placing in jail the owners of those news organisations in Glasgow. While in Dublin, I kept on picking up messages of support from the people of Dublin. They were speaking to me in code to give me advice. They were also smearing me, as my Tourette's of the mind had gone really bad. I then went back to Letterkenny Court Hotel, on Thursday the 3rd of July, 2014, and back to Scotland on the 4th of July, 2014. On the morning of the 4th of July, 2014, as I was getting ready for the journey back to Scotland, I received a message from the Irish security services that I was not going to be smoked. At the bus stop, an MI6 agent was also at the bus station. He was on his mobile, and when I played the tune Moving On Up by Primal Scream, he then left the bus stop. This was the London security services saying that they had withdrawn the assassins. While travelling through Larne, I also picked up a message from the UVF. It was on a camper van and had the word brave written on it. I was given a t-shirt at Christmas time from my family that had a camper van on it and an American flag. This was my family telling me that they knew about the show and the game, as this was also used by the NSA in whistleblowing films Red, using the tune Going Up the Country by Kent Heat. At the port in Larne, because when I was passing through the north, I had started to think about going to a hospital in the north of Ireland. While waiting to be served at the shop, a Northern Irish woman sent me a coded message saying at 1:45 she was going to ASDA. This meant no Irish hospital, because I would be poisoned, as ASDA was where I had bought the pie that had poison in it. On the boat back to Scotland, because the crossing was rough, the doors to the deck were closed. While sitting complaining about not being able to have a cigarette, I was looking out of a window when I was surprised to see a passenger and his child walking intentionally and comedically carefully past the window. This was the passengers letting me know that one of the decks was open for smokers. The people all over planet Earth have been sending me messages to keep my spirits up and to help me get the operation. Back in Glasgow, I then told the police that because I had now exhausted every peaceful avenue, I was now forced to go down to the police station to try and get the police to help me despite the fact that the chief constable was trying to murder me. I had told the entire planet when I was getting ready to leave Ireland that if the police tried to murder me, I would defend myself. I visited my sister on the 5th of July, 2014. My sister then let me know that she knew about the show. My family were trying to protect her by not letting on that she knew about the show as she works for the NHS and the NHS are trying to murder me. My sister let me know that she knew because she was aware that I was getting ready to fight the police if they tried to kill me. She had left several messages for me. One was a book about the police covering up my evidence and murdering me. Another was that I should take the news media's money as the media had sent me a message when I had arrived in Glasgow from Ireland that they would give me money not to go to the police. My sister did not know that this was a sting by the news media and the NHS to murder mine the operation to remove the implant while the cover-up was in place. The fact that my sister was clutching at a straw that was not there to try and save my life was also the final straw for myself. I then decided to do another PSY Ops music broadcast twice a day for 84 minutes to let the police and the news media as well as the whole planet know that I was going to inflict bloody mayhem in the police station if the police did not do their job and investigate all of the crimes committed against me and my family and instead try to murder me by illegally sectioning me or by refusing to accept my evidence as I have now got nowhere else to go to try and save my life and the life of my family. I had picked up a coded message from the NSA on a website telling the police to do their job and investigate these crimes. It is now the 11th of July, 2014, and I have now finished printing 9 volumes of evidence for the police, and tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock I intend to go to Aitkenhead Road Police Station for my date with Destiny. On the 11th of July, 2014, I went down to Aitkenhead Road Police Station to hand in the evidence that I have acquired about the implant and all of the organizations that were trying to kill me. I had told everyone via the implant when and where I was going to do this and that I would defend myself as the Scottish Police Chief Stephen House was one of the people who were trying to kill me and he was forcing the police to not investigate all of the crimes that were committed against me despite the fact that the police had the smartphone app and were illegally listening to my mind. I had also said via the implant that I was going to record what was said at the station on the voice recorder on my mobile phone. When I arrived at the station, I tried to report the crimes, but the officer said that they were too busy and that I should go home and phone the police. While I was going home, I realized that I had forgotten to take the pies that were poisoned with me, and I thought that this was why the police had told me to go home. I went home and got the pies and then went back down to the police station. As I was passing Hampden Park, a plainclothes policeman was looking at me and pointing back up the road. For some reason he was telling me to go back home. I then arrived at the station, but the police still refused to interview me or take my evidence and again told me to go home and phone the police. I then left and went home and phoned 999. 2 police, 1 male and 1 female, then came to my home. I told them what had happened, but they were pretending to not know about the implant or the app show. They then threatened to phone my GP to take me to hospital. I then told the police that I would not go to hospital and also told whole world and the police chief via the implant who I knew was listening that I would defend myself if they tried this, as the police were trying to section me so that the psychiatrist Mike Taylor could poison me. The male policeman then went outside to talk on his radio while the female policewoman took my details. When the male policeman came back he said that he wanted to phone my sister. I gave him my sister's number and he phoned her. When my sister arrived, the policeman first spoke to her alone outside of my home. When they came back my sister had then denied that she knew that I had the implant. The police then said that they wanted to take me to the hospital to speak to a GP and that my sister should accompany me. On the policeman's radio, I then overheard a female voice say the terrible event. I then asked the policeman what was the terrible event and he said he did not know. I then told the police via the implant that I knew they were going to try and murder me by sectioning me and said that I was going to defend myself. They then took me and my sister to the Victoria Infirmary. While waiting in the hospital reception, I overheard someone at the reception say to the receptionist that the GP had refused to do it. I took this to mean that the GP had refused to collaborate with the police. While further waiting, the staff at the hospital were telling me in code to defend myself. I was then called to speak to the GP. I then again turned on my voice recorder on my mobile phone. The GP then asked what I was there for, and I told him about the implant. He then denied to know about it despite the fact that everyone knew about the smartphone app broadcast. I asked for a CT scan to prove what was in me, and he then said that he would have to go and talk to other GPs. I have been to hospital before and the GPs had never went away to speak to other GPs. Another female GP then came in to speak to me. The policeman who took us there passed and said to me that he was going to go away and leave me in the capable hands of the medical staff. When I was in my home, I had said via the implant that I would defend myself against any GP who tried to illegally section me, as I knew that this was Stephen House's plan to murder me. When I saw the GP, I said to myself that she was beautiful and then Saito the whole world via the implant that she was so beautiful that I could not defend myself against her. She then spoke to me about what I was there for, and I also asked her for a CT scan. Eventually she then said that she would have to go and speak to other GPs. While waiting, I could overhear the nurses speaking to other patients, but they were speaking in code. They had also mentioned the word murder. I then said to my sister that this was a sting to section me. I had also noticed that my sister was near to tears and had bloodshot eyes. When the GP came back in, she asked me who MIP psychiatrist was. I told her Dr. Sri Reddy at Florence Street. She then tried to persuade me to go to Levendale Hospital to speak to Dr. Sri Reddy, as he was on call there and he could organize the CT scan. I said that I would not go, as if I was taken there they would section me and the psychiatrist Mike Taylor would murder me. She then said that she had said tot hem that I was not sectionable as I was not a threat to her or anyone else, and that Dr. Sri Reddy was there. She had also missaid his name. I have developed a speech impediment because of the chemical lobotomy that was induced by antipsychotics, and I sometimes slur my speech. I replied that Mike Taylor was also there. I also believed that she missaid his name to take the piss out of me. I insisted that I would not go to Levendale Hospital. She then said that she would have to go and speak to them again. She came back and then said that I could not get the CT scan, but that she had made an appointment with my psychiatrist at Florence Street, as my sister had already said that. I then left the hospital with my sister and went home. While back at my house, I had told the whole world that the reason that my sister had denied knowing that the implant was in me and why she was near to tears was because the policemen, while they were outside of my home, had threatened to murder her children and had forced her to choose between her children and her brother. I then listened to the recording that I had made and heard several death threats and code words which confirmed that this was a sting to murder me. I also said via the implant that because the police had threatened my sister, the police chief had expected me to kill the GFN, the police could come in and murder me. Several days later, I watched the film The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. While watching it, I said the police wanted me to watch it before I went to the Victoria Infirmary, as I was sent a message outside of my home. A Virgin Media van had Lee Van Cleef written on it, the actor who plays Angel Eyes. While watching the film, I picked up several messages, one of which was the boys in blue off the Union Army at the bridge scene. Their general said the sacrifice. Another message was "See you later, idiots," which was the police chief Stephen House and the UK media sending a message to the police officers. At the end of the film, Angel Eyes is killed and falls into a grave. I then realised that it was the police who I was speaking to and not the NHS, as it was Apollo's sting. This was the UK media and the police chief telling the whole world that the beautiful undercover policewoman who was at the Victoria was supposed to be killed by mine in order to cover up what the UK media and the police chief had done. This was why the police chief ordered the policeman to tell my sister to choose between her children and her brother, as the UK media and Stephen House, the police chief, thought that this would make him kill her and turn her into Angel Eyes, the sacrifice from the film The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. The police were stung into believing that they were trying to turn me into a shop. It was a sting within a sting. This was confirmed with another of my tunes from Faithless album, Sunday 8 p.m, which contains the tune Postcards, which has the lyrics Cops Protect Shops. It also contains the lyrics Could Resist Taking the, which was the police chief and the UK media taking the piss out of the police. It also contains the lyrics As the Trucks Passed. The police chief had ordered the police to drive cars and trucks past my home constantly. The UK media and the police chief were using the tunes that I was playing to send messages and death threats to me, including when I was supposed to be killed 2 days before the European elections when they had used an album by Fotheringay. The UK media and Stephen House, the Police Scotland Chief Constable, were trying to cover up the crimes they had committed against me by murdering the most beautiful policewoman I have ever seen by getting me to kill her in self-defense, since they knew I would have realized that the police had threatened my sister, and then they were relying on the police murdering me in front of my sister, and then they would not have been put into prison, which was where I kept on saying I was going to put them. They would have then put her picture on the front page of every newspaper in Britain and were hoping that this would have painted me as the monster that they were trying to smear me as for the past 8 years in an attempt to cover up what was done to me and for revenge against the person and his family who had defied the UK media. After watching the film and analysing what happened, I then told the police via the Implant that I was going to go to a dairy near to the police station at Aitkenhead Road to see if the police were now willing to go after those who were responsible for attempting to murder one of their policewomen. Instead, the police tried to sting me to cover up what had happened at the Victoria Infirmary. I re-listened to the audio recordings that I had made of the sting and realized that the code 19 which they were using was meant to be interpreted as no police, which was implying that since the police were breaking the law, there was therefore no rule of law in Britain. While listening to the album Dance of Death by Iron Maiden, I realized that this whole album was the inspiration behind the attempt to murder the policewoman and myself at the Victoria Infirmary. The album's tunes contained lots of messages confirming this, and the tune Paskendale was also key. This particular tune, which I then researched online, was a reference to the Battle of Paskendale during the First World War and mentioned the name of one of the generals, a British commander, Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig. This was implying that since the government, the news media and the police had already used music, that I had to think up stings that the UK Foreign Secretary William Hague was also involved in this murder plot at the Victoria Infirmary, and also his boss, the Prime Minister David Cameron. The proof of this was Fotheringay's album Fotheringay, which was used to inspire the attempt to shoot me in my sleep 2 days before the European elections, but the security services had refused to follow the orders and had let me know this in code. This meant that PM David Cameron MP, FS William Hague MP, Police Chief Stephen House and some of his lower management, as well as the UK news media including BT, were all involved in dreaming up the sting The Sacrifice at Errigal, the code name I had given to a hospital, as my number code for hospital is 5 and E = 5, where they all collaborated to murder the policewoman and myself, the Victoria Infirmary in Glasgow. I then also realised that the album CD cover was no longer in my home. The police were ordered to steal the CD while they were in my house, but the CD was not in the case and all my music is backed up on MP3. Someone wanted a blood memento of The Sacrifice at Errigal. On the 24th of July, 2014, I intended to go to the Royal Infirmary as one last attempt to get the CT scan. While walking to the hospital, I passed 2 men. They asked me to take their picture at the Commonwealth Games mascot near Hampden. I did so and said to the whole planet via the Implant that this was 2 undercover policemen and that I was giving the police chief Stephen House my fingerprint as if I was forced to defend myself in case they had illegally incarcerated me, that I would not run and would wait for the police, and had done this top row of it. In the Royal Infirmary, I was left waiting for 3 hours before being seen by a GP, and then I was refused my legal right to have the CT scan. The management at the NHS are collaborating with the UK government and the police to cover up what was done to me. They had taken me to a treatment area where they put me in the eye room. While waiting Tobe seen, I wandered about the treatment area, which had 3 treatment rooms. All of them were empty, as well as the eye room. In one of the rooms was a scarf that had gowl designs on it. I have taken a picture of it and also of other parts of the treatment area. There was also a sign on the wall in the eye room which was about Gartnerville Hospital. This was the NHS telling me why they were refusing to give me the CT scan, as while I was illegally incarcerated in Gartnerville in 2006 the NHS had tried to murder me. I have taken a picture of it. While talking to the nurse, I asked her why I was in the eye room and she replied that I was put in here because there were no more spaces. I then said that there were 2 rooms here empty and she then replied that do you not want to be in here, would you rather be somewhere else? I had taken pictures of the empty rooms. I was then taken to another treatment area to speak to a GP who refused to give me the CT scan despite the fact that everyone knows that I have the illegal medical implant. Later that night, after I had spent 3 hours exposing the true extent of the UK news media Toth UK via the smartphone app, one listened to the Pogues tune Streets of Sorrow Birmingham 6. There was a verse framed by the law. I then realised that the police chief was not testing to see if I would defend myself but was instead planning onusing my fingerprint to frame me for some crime. But because of the smartphone app and the fact that everyone knows that I am an innocent man, including whoever would be on the jury if I went to court, they were planning on framing me after they murder me. There are verses in the album Dance of Death which revealed that the police know that I'm innocent and that the news media were smearing me with lies in order to torture me and paint me as a monster. The whole world know that this is the case, so the police chief Stephen House was planning to smear me after I was dead. I have still to get this implant out of my brain as of this day. No government will remove the vision and nightshade implant if you ever get implanted with it, unless you get into a military hospital on a friendly willing foreign nation. Resist the Western government's implant agenda before it's too late.
That was John Duffy's statement. The first nightshade implant victim. We will continue to expose Project Omega until all the implanted victims get the nightshade implant removed by the UK government and are taken back home to their mothers. Anonymous will continue to resist the depopulate and implant agenda of the Western governments until the people have won this war against humanity. We are Anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.